exemplifies the Soviet Academy's uh, work in um, the logic of natural science and the philosophy of the natural sciences. Uh, just to let you know, this was their great achievement in the natural sciences. However, they could not make the leap to the natural sciences because the logic of the, did I say to the social sciences, forgive me, because the logic of the natural sciences is not the same as the logic of social structure. No way the same. Um, After thinking about it, as I said we had to talk about logic in relationship to the American social system. So for the last week, I've uh, been agonizing in ways that I don't think you all will believe over this effort to make sense of and to make clear and even to develop a pedagogy to explain all of this and to show the relevance of logic, social structure, and social systems to understanding social transformation. More precisely, the revolutionary transformation of the system. I'm still working on these questions, and I believe that together we will be able to discover how logics in its many uses and forms can assist us in understanding the revolutionary transformation of U.S. society. This is a bold endeavor, given, as we will see when we return, I think, at the end of this, to some discussion of Horne and West, that they have completely abandoned the question of revolutionary change. They have no concept of logic or the logic of systems or complexity, you know. Uh, and I just have to say, concepts that seem to be very normal and natural if one is trying to understand the American social system. But the question is, are they really trying to understand the American social system, or have they abandoned that? I would say for the most part, they've abandoned it. But again, I'd like to make it clear that the study of logic, although if you take a course as an undergraduate in logic at any university, you will be taught every kind of syllogism possible, uh, and you will be convinced after taking the course that logic is the most irrelevant thing in the world. But I want to make the case for logic that it is neither retreat into intellectual uh, elitism or into some corner of abstractions to take one away from reality. You know, I've been convinced of the role of logic, although I didn't know quite how to do it until a few years ago. But I've been convinced of the connection of logic to modern revolution. Modern revolutionaries from Karl Marx, for example, saying in the first chapter of Das Kapital, and other places, for instance, a book of notes called the Grundrisse, which means the groundwork. Uh, he interrogates logic and Hegel constantly. For Lenin, it was similar. His notebooks on Hegel's science of logic are his meed to study logic in order to understand how systems change. And that's why revolutionaries study logic, because they're interested in social change. And that's why those who are not revolutionaries don't study logic, because they can't commit or understand or don't want to understand social change. Uh, Most times they're more comfortable uh, retreating into some form of identity politics or other things. But you study logic, or these revolutionaries have studied logic, because they are optimistic about the possibilities of change. C.L.R. James, the black theorist and Marxist, has an entire book uh, on Hegel's dialectic. And again, um, it is so apparent to me that Du Bois's Black Reconstruction is as well a work of logic. Um, but in this endeavor, I have not sought to replace any of the previous logics, the logic of identity or syllogistic logic, um, or dialectics, with a new logic, but in fact to deploy logic in many of its forms to investigate those phenomena that we experience in in nature and in society. And society is far more difficult, I think, than nature. Certainly, and I was saying this to Purba and Sambarto, certainly quantum mechanics or the physics of subatomic particles, particle physics, which have presented the greatest, most difficult problems for logic and philosophy of science. Uh, it's like most of the logics that have been used to investigate physical phenomenon had worked until you got to quantum mechanics. And then everything went crazy, including up to the point of string theory, which is the craziest of everything. Um, Certainly, and I just want to just go through this, um, new findings in evolutionary biology and structures of matter. Uh, Structures of matter have presented great problems because so much is indeterminate and uncertain at the level of small particles or small living or biological bodies. We just can't figure it out. Or their neurosystems. It's just very difficult. So, in a lot of ways, we are at that same place that the natural sciences find themselves. I guess that's why we can have such a cross-disciplinary discussion most of the time with biologists and physicists, along with people who study statistics and art and so on. Because knowledge is at that moment of crisis. It's not just that we can observe with new high-powered microscopes or um, with what do they call colliders?
Yeah, large hadron colliders.
Yeah, where you smash atoms together and particles come out. And even when we see the particles, we don't understand them, or we can't figure out why they appear in two places at the same time, or that's the way they are observed. And these, I mean, big question marks. And it's the same thing for social structure. It's kind of like we talk about everything, but we don't talk about the real thing. We talk around it and about it without talking about it. But again, my assertion today is that we have to understand many logics, including the logics of probability, what Du Bois called chance, statistical probability, the logics of statistical probability, or the logics of uncertainty. We deploy and try to understand logics themselves in order to scientifically investigate social systems and social systemic complexity. I wish to underline the concept complexity. When was the last time you heard that concept used in discourses about society? You can sit around and listen and read books about gender, about race, about whatever. I don't recall hearing the deployment of the concept complexity or social system or social structure or social systemic complexity. Think about it. I mean, even to invoke it now, social systemic complexity literally opens up a whole range of possible ways of thinking. Without it, we're condemned to almost adolescent language about society, and the deployment of concepts such as race, gender, trans, this, and then try to put together a narrative about society deploying these concepts without once thinking about the whole system and systems complexity. Such notions as complexity, what should be normal, are avoided like the plague. Now, our approach, which kind of might be singular and unique, is that we assert that the critical moment in modern history of the United States, that is for the last 150 years, was the defeat of Reconstruction. The modern American social system is a product of the defeat of Reconstruction, not as liberals and nationalists and everything. It was not birthed when the first African slave was brought here. The modern system, let me put it this way, with the defeat of the slave system, there was a social historic rupture, a break, a qualitatively different system arose. This is how we begin. And therefore, the concept of the system being today what it was in the 17th or 18th or 19th century. And you would get that from Marxist political economy, Marxist theorists. You would get it from theorists of settler colonialism, and on and on. But all of these approaches, while they claim to be historical or claim to be being put forward by people who are historians or whose theory is informed by history, are in fact non or ahistorical, because history is not linear. Even dialectics, even what Marxists say, and I don't know how they just avoid what is central to Marxism. There are qualitative changes. Now, does the qualitative change have to be, like a Marxist would say, from capitalism to socialism? Is that the only qualitative change? No. It was the system, the social system, that emerges after the defeat of Reconstruction. A qualitatively different political and economic system arose. But more than anything, a new social system. This becomes the enterprise that Du Bois takes on to explain this social system. And this is why one would have to say that he is the initiator of a whole new movement of thought. His work in all of its manifestations is a study of the social system that arises after the defeat of Reconstruction. That's our beginning. Not that we avoid all of the questions of what came before it. Certainly, 244 years is not a small thing of slavery, 244 years of enslavement. However, the modern system, the system of today, the crisis of this system, the complexity of this system goes back to the defeat of Reconstruction. And out of that, and we've discussed this somewhat, the legal, political, ideological superstructure to talk about race, even race, in whatever way you want to talk about it, we are talking about a set of identities, let us say that, not to mention a constituent part of the current social system. However you want to talk about race, what we're talking about is something that arises after the defeat of Reconstruction. There is no discourse about race like what we're doing that precedes it. So even without admitting it, there is an acknowledgement, not an acknowledgement, without admitting it, what they are actually doing is studying the system that arises after the defeat of Reconstruction. Okay, let me just go a little faster. The system that arises after Reconstruction, the defeat of Reconstruction, is a modern social, complex social system. Again, I want to emphasize a modern, complex social system. That is why, because of the complexity, we have to deploy logic even when we develop new logics of investigation. Let me just make this clear. We can readily and must distinguish between the logics of things, of phenomenon, such as a social system, and the logic of investigation. Okay? The logic, for instance, the logic, and by logic here I'm talking about the processes of the structuring of a social system. It's what Du Bois called law. The patterns of the formation of a social system. In other words, what What defines the processes that make and remake, that transforms the existing social system? That's one thing. But then there is the logic of investigation. Okay? They're not the same. Although to arrive at scientifically accurate conclusions, the logic of investigation must be parallel to the logic of the system that you are studying. Let me just I think I'm making this point already, but I want to state it again. The logic that defined the American social system during slavery is different than the logic of the system after slavery. In other words, the logics, and I want to use this word, of the structuration, the process of structuring and restructuring and transformation of a social system, of the social system, was different after the defeat of Reconstruction. In fact, I would argue qualitatively different, and in fact, must be viewed as a unique system in modern history. So while it might be acceptable for Marx to adopt Hegel's dialectic to explain the development and trajectory of modern capitalism, that logic is inadequate to explaining the social system that emerges after Reconstruction. So if you attempt to take, as great as it is, Marxist dialectics or Hegel's dialectics and use it to explain the American situation, the problem that you will face is that the logic of investigation and the logic of the system itself don't fit. Okay? I'll explain why it doesn't. Well, I'll explain it now. It is the color line and its role, its function. Please, if I'm using certain new words, you can ask me, just write them down. As a structuring structure, a structure that structures other things in a system. A structuring structure. Race is not a derivative of other relationships and structures. In fact, it structures or co-structures all of these other structures. For example, to talk about class or class struggle in a way where the color line and race, and here I'm talking about race as a system, a structure, is seen as derivative, will never explain the American system, nor political and ideological practices to change the American system. The logic of investigation and the logic of the system are so different that the investigator, the revolutionary, the thinker is always busting his or her head up against a brick wall. You just can't go anywhere with it. Does that make sense? And that's, that's what we all experience, the frustration when we listen to various public intellectuals, leading academics talk. And except that they use sophisticated postmodern language, they get us no closer to understanding this system. Perhaps I'm repeating myself. Okay, yeah. Let me just put it this way. What is called the color line adds social structural complexity to human social relationships, institutions, and structures. The color line that is consigning a major part of the American population to a special marginalized, super exploited, oppressed group does not mean that this reality, the social structures of race and racial oppression, are not marginal, even though the people who experience this oppression are marginalized. That is separated from legal, political, and other forms of equality. Am I making sense?
Say it again.
Okay. You know, one of the tropes in most race discussion is that black people are marginalized people. You see what I'm saying? Okay, no problem. I mean, what they're addressing is segregation. Okay? However, because the people who are oppressed by race are marginalized, that doesn't mean the question of race and the system of race is not central to the overall system. In other words, the complex social system that we are looking at is structured by race, and race is structured by the system itself. In other words, to talk about, forgive me if I'm not being clear enough. This is the pedagogical problem that I was trying to grapple with all week. How to explain what I think I know, and that's more difficult than knowing what you think you know. I have to tell you, because we are in the space of new language. And let me just say again, it is the language of sociology and of sociological theory. It is not the language of postmodern cultural discourse, you know, which at its best is empty-headed and, you know. My point is that race both structures the system and is structured by the system. That is to say, when we get to it, that's why we talk about trialectics. What are the foundations of the modern American social system? I want to emphasize social system. We are not doing an economic analysis. We are not looking at social systems or human beings in the narrow sense of economic man. We are looking at complex social systems. My argument is that without certain really profound revisions in economics and Marxist economics, you can't understand a damn thing. Because every Marxist economist or every economist knows it all, but they don't understand complexity. And how can you know it all about the economy and not understand complexity? Well, that's a problem for them to answer. Without, and I'm going to get to the trialectics, I'm building up to the threes in logic, you know. Without a concept of a complex social system, you take revolutionary change off the table. And then your discourse about answers or solutions to the problems and crises of the system boil down to policies. Oh, I'm a socialist. Why are you a socialist, Bernie Sanders? because I am for universal health care. Is that socialism or is that universal health care? You know, and I'm not against universal health care, and I'm not against Bernie Sanders advocating for it. But just call yourself a progressive. You know, you're not all that. You're not a revolutionary. Because you want, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way. You think that policies and legislation can reform the system and make it more humane. But like Cornel said to Jyotish in their interview, Cornel said, I disagree with Mamdani, who wants a more humane New York without black people, or Bernie Sanders. I want universal health care. Let me talk about universal issues without addressing the specificities of black people. However, here is the problem. The problem is race is a part of the constituent, I don't want to use, I'm using the constituting of the system itself. So, in other words, by avoiding the question of this special oppression of the black proletariat, what you are saying is, we wish to hold on to a white supremacist social system, but to reform it in such a way that everybody has health care. So I want to pass laws where everybody get health care. But everybody won't get equal health care in a system that discriminates against a large part of the population. So in the end, unless you prove otherwise, what you are talking about is reforming a white supremacist social system to make life better for white people. I think we have to keep it 100 on that. I think Mamdani is the most recent example of this. And the social democrat Mamdani will end up being a mere liberal at best. I'm not going to talk about his meeting with Trump, but that's another matter. So if one is satisfied with a change of policy rather than a change of systems, I would recommend join the Democratic Socialists of America. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you are progressive liberal, great. Progressive liberals need their party too. But don't call that revolutionary. Unless you believe the ruling class narrative, the Cold War McCarthyite narrative, that to be a revolutionary is to be anti-American, anti-working class, anti-people. That revolution by definition means some form of authoritarianism. Unless that is what you mean, and if you don't mean that, your narrative is a bad faith narrative because you're lying to the people in order to, as they say, win them politically without telling them the truth about the situation. And this was the essence of what Cornel was saying to Jyotish about Mamdani. There's something bad faith in the whole thing, you know. Mamdani, you won the mayoral race, but it's a fake, your fake. So the consensus point, the point of unity of all of the so-called progressive forces, from social democrats to the Communist Party, to the Party of Socialism and Liberation, to the American Communist Party, to the Revolutionary Communist Party, you know, we can name them on and on and on. What they hold in common is that either they do not understand the logic of revolutionary change, or they don't believe in revolutionary change. And by revolutionary change, I want to make it clear that we are not talking about some wild acts of individual so-called revolutionaries who want to bring the system down by murdering high-profile members of the ruling elite.
Right.
We are talking about a people's movement that has as its objective the qualitative, fundamental transformation of the existing system. And so we have to, just a question. People say, well, y'all discussing logic. That has no, I don't, what do you, I'm trying to feed my family. I'm trying to do something about the schools. Well, I'm down. But somebody got to discuss the deeper and longer term project of change. Okay? It must be discussed. We cannot concede ground on any of these fundamental matters to the ruling elite and their academics. We can't concede an inch to them. Well, we might be able to compromise on how we're going to do Obamacare versus universal health care, the political contingencies of a House of Representatives and a Senate, yada, yada, yada. Okay, but on issues of fundamental ideological importance, we cannot and should not concede an inch. And anyone that does exposes the fact that they have found peace with the existing system and life in the existing system. One of the arguments that I made last time is that I believe that in terms, I don't know how he thinks about himself, but in terms of the theory and logic that Gerald Horne puts forward, he is an anti-revolutionary. Not that he is going to stand up and call for an attack upon socialists or communists like Trump does, but his theory does not move the nation or the people away from what already exists. His argument is that the existing system and the people who uphold it are so powerful that the nation cannot experience change, radical change. This is the complete opposite of Martin Luther King, Paul Robeson and Du Bois and so on, Diane Nash. Let me just go. Okay, I want to define logic and social systems. Am I going to?
No, you're fine.
I am looking at logic or defining the logic of social systems or social structures as logic as a study of the laws of motion of complex social systems. It's what Du Bois called law. The logic of social systems is a logic of the movement of social systems. In this regard, the logic of social systems as we are talking about it is also the logic of the structuring, restructuration, and transformation of existing social systems. We're looking at it right now. These eruptions are not to be taken lightly. For example, Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that she will leave the Republican Party. Well, is it just Marjorie Taylor Greene? There are many others who have launched an all-out attack upon MAGA, Trump, and the Republican Party, as well as the Democratic Party. We are looking at something that is a manifestation of social change, which I would argue is also systemic. So then, logic, the logic of social transformation. Well, we are looking at almost an irreversible and complex crisis, at least of MAGA, if not of the entire social system, political system. Why would we look at it any other way? Should we reduce it to an individual? Oh, that's just Marjorie Taylor Greene and she's depressed. Or is it more systemic? And to understand her, must you understand systemic factors? Now, I know I'm going overlooking. Thus far, we have been talking about the macro, the overall system, the overall structure, the determining structures, as it were. Let me just make a distinction, although not over-determining.
Okay.
We're looking at the system in its largest, most complex manifestations. But we can also and should also look at structures below the macro. We call this middle range, or the word meso is used, M-E-S-O, mesosystem. Well, what constitutes macro or meso? How do we make the distinction? That's another matter. I don't want to go into that right now. But there are systems and structures that are not macro, that are not the whole system. Okay? We could perhaps talk of mesostructures as the party system, the government system. Okay? So, for example, a crisis of the MAGA movement of the Republican Party, we could look at that without at the same time drawing a conclusion that this is a systemic crisis. Right now, it is a crisis of the political governing system, okay? But not insignificant. Every crisis does not have to be a systems transforming crisis. It could be a crisis at the mid-level of politics, of parties. In some ways, economic crises like recessions, inflation, deflation, and other questions can be looked at as mid-level. Okay, another thing, it depends. Or you could look at the economy as a co-constituting part of the overall system. It is part of the constitution of the whole system. You can look at it that way. Or you can look at the economy as mid-level below the macro. Let me just get to the point. I know I'm talking around it. The macro system, as it is constituted, consists of three. It is a triad. Its logic is trialectic. It is the white worker, the black worker, and the ruling elite. That is how the system is constituted. And of course, that is Du Bois's logic in Black Reconstruction. These huge forces that shape and structure the overall system are the core of the logic of the American social system. In contrast, a Marxist dialectical approach would see the system in twos as the proletariat and the capitalist class. Now, here we are looking, I want to say this just to be clear. The social system is not just made up of static institutions or structures, such as the black worker. In this respect, the social system is made up of active human beings. So it is a dynamic system. It is not just the black worker over here and the white worker over here. It is a dynamic black proletariat, I would consider a less dynamic white working class, and a ruling class that is active and dominant. The macro system, the system itself, is grounded and organized in this way, but not alone. This is not the only thing, but this is the foundational. There is the economy, there is gender, there is ideology, there is knowledge, and there are universities. They are all a part of a social system that is grounded in the determinative and structuring structures of black worker, white worker, and ruling elite. Some people say, well, you left out the Native Americans. Well, I haven't left them out. They're not just a part of the structuring of the macro system. Oh, you left out women. No, I haven't. They're just not, as women, a part of the structuring of the system. Some people say, well, where does the economy fit in? You know, well, the economy is part of the structuring of the system. So much so, let me give you an example why I don't think the economy is determinative. You could change, and this is kind of the suspicion or the dissatisfaction that Cornel had about Mamdani. You can change the economy without changing the overall social system. It could be a socialist economy where you may change the ruling elite, but not change, in other words, let's say, in the best case scenario for Marxism, the working class achieves power, by which most times they mean white workers achieve state power. That has not fundamentally changed the social system itself. I'm going to go quickly, forgive me. I think I've said enough about logics. We can go more into this, and we will. There's a whole body of terminology. There's a whole body of theory that looks at society. And here we are doing social science or sociology. We are not doing, in the first instance, political economy. We're not doing African American studies or gender studies. We're doing sociology, and we're doing it at the level of the theory and logic of the social system. We look at the American social system as a social system. That the logic of change must be the logic of changing the social system. Not the logic of changing the way we talk about the social system. You know, that was kind of the bait and switch, you know.
Right.
Oh, we've created the postmodern move. Oh, we've created new
Right.
language to talk about race, about gender, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in changing the language of talking about the system, it is presumed that you have changed the system or are making a move towards changing the system. Okay, just a quick thing, and without going into a lot of discussion of this, and we could do this at another time. Multiple forms of logic. Logic as investigation, and logic as the logic of existing phenomenon. None of this can be rejected. In other words, there are structures that can best be understood in linear terms.
Okay.
For example, if I'm doing information science, if I'm doing computer programming, well, all of that is linear, ones and zeros. What I'm going to say, oh, I'm going to impose dialectical or trialectical logic on computer no, that would be crazy. Now, if we go to another level of computing, let us say quantum computing, which I don't know what is the logic of that, maybe we would move from linearity to something else. But as things stand today, if we do a computer programming, if we do AI, if we do chat GBT, we're working within the realm of linearity. Okay. There are other phenomena for which dialectics would be the appropriate logic. For example, within a system, the system of the United States, the relationship of black worker to white worker is a dialectical relationship. And we can talk about a logic of that relationship, a dialectic of that relationship, as we must. That is not a static relationship. The internal dynamics often of the black community, there are dialectical relationships. Similarly, in the white community, the relationship of white workers to the white elite is dialectical. Now, is it the foundation, let us say, of a revolutionary logic? No. It only deals partially with the system. To get to that, you need a trialectic, a complex understanding of the relationships of white workers to the white elite, of white workers to black workers, of black workers to the white elite, and so on and so forth. And we have to be able to define mechanisms through which these dialectical relationships take place. What are the mechanisms that both material and ideological, which force white working people to identify on the basis of what is considered race with the white elite, rather than with black workers? Those are problems that we have to answer in the course of understanding systemic complexity. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, these are questions that have to be addressed. And you can't dismiss them by all of these white people as settlers. You know, with a settler mentality. Well, suppose it turns out that a good part of them don't see themselves as settlers and don't have a settler mentality. Just some other things, and then I'll end here. For example, I won't end here. I got something else I got to say. While I've not talked about what are ideological structures, what are political structures, what do we mean when we talk about strategic agents, both as political parties, as larger groups, and as individuals? For example, a Martin Luther King, a Malcolm X, a Muhammad Ali, who influence society and people. What about the Black church? What about Black gods? How does this affect the dynamics or dialectics within Black communities and in the relationship between Black and white? Okay, I'll end on this. Obviously, we are not relying upon the Soviet Academy or the East German Academy in understanding the social system. Their greatest contribution was in the logic and philosophy of the natural science, and they made a huge contribution. Huge contribution. In fact, one could argue that their deployment of dialectics and dialectical logic in the natural sciences was a great leap forward in the long history of the Enlightenment and of science. The Soviet Academy, I would argue, is superior to the British and American academies in philosophy and logic of natural sciences. The great weakness was the attempt to take the great discoveries of philosophy and logic of the natural science and apply them almost uncritically, unchanged to society. So much is missed. And certainly, you can never explain a society like the United States post-Reconstruction. Just a return to the examples of Cornel West and Gerald Horne, I'm sorry. And again, I want to make clear that they are important parts of the intellectual and ideological history of the nation, especially of Black people, after the Civil Rights period, the Third American Revolution. They are significant because you can't talk about the ideological development or the ideological conditions of Black people without discussing them. They are public intellectuals and they are serious academics. However, we have to distinguish between them and revolutionary theory. Neither of them is a revolutionary. And I don't mean it is not an ad hominem, it is not a put down. Theories must be judged as theories, separate from the individuals who developed them and who are identified with them. The 1619 Project, the counter-revolution of 1776, settler colonialism are not revolutionary theories. At best, they provide a set of slogans and tropes for people who need quick answers. But they're not revolutionary theories. By revolutionary theories, at least, even if you are not successful, have a logic and philosophy of transformation, of revolutionary change. If your theory cannot show evidence of that, it is not a revolutionary theory. I think in a lot of ways, the settler colonialist counter-revolution of 1776, the 1619 Project, never claimed to be revolutionary. They don't make that claim. Now, a person who consumes it or who adheres to it could say, oh, this is revolutionary. Well, everybody, can have their own likes and not likes, and sometimes, for people who might not be able to study these things, what is revolutionary is in the eyes of the beholder. I think it's revolutionary, therefore it's revolutionary. But I think the criteria of determining what is revolutionary has to be higher. It has to show a path to revolutionary change. Gerald's thesis, or the settler colonial thesis, and he's not alone. I would include other people whom I won't name. For whom to be left and to be revolutionary is somehow to be outside of what they consider mainstream thinking, or to have something novel to say about an existing situation. I don't know if I'm making sense. The bar of deciding, or the bar of the criterion of what is a revolutionary theory is so low that you can be a non-revolutionary and be considered a revolutionary. A non-revolutionary theory, and because you say it in such a way, because it sounds new, because it sounds radical, oh, this is revolutionary. And because I'm only 21 and poorly educated at an elite university, I'm looking for anything that could validate my need for a revolutionary position. And of course, much of this is marketed and produced for younger people. I would say the same with Cornel. And as we said before, and this is not a small matter, he is a pragmatist. And he believes, and this is a positive, very positive, that philosophy must be done among the people, among ordinary people. This is hugely positive. And Cornel, as a public intellectual, is a unique figure of this time. There are very few people who have so committed themselves to public discourse and public criticism of himself as Cornel West has. And that's a noble endeavor. And he is paid a certain price. Like Lawrence Summers. I won't talk about him. So-called president of Harvard University, so-called smart guy, so-called full professor right out of graduate school in economics. No essay, no book, but he had the complexion for the connection. That's what you have. But you ain't got the complexion for the connection.
Oh no, this is Gerald. Oh
no, this is Larry Summers. And a whole number of other cats. Paul Krugman. Nobel laureate in economics. He got that. He got a full professorship right out of MIT. I think it was MIT. With not a book, not a serious article, but he had that complexion to make the connection. You see what I'm saying? I'm not going to hold you to that high standard because I know you, and I know you because I know your complexion. But Larry Summers was always given a free ride. even to being the Secretary of the Treasury and then the President of Harvard. Now, the deep thing about that, he fired or he insulted Cornel West, saying, man, you've been listening to too much hip hop and talking too much about hip hop, and that's not worthy of a Harvard professor. As though Larry Summers is worthy with his trifling self of a Harvard professor. At that point, Cornell said, I'm not going to let no white man talk to me any old kind of way. Harvard ain't all that. And he left and went to Princeton. And then, you know, a bunch of black people at Harvard, they said, well, look, Cornell, we want you to come back and we're going to get you tenure and all that. And so Cornel West ended up being at Harvard for about 7 more years. And he said, well, look, when am I going to get my tenure? And they said, oh, no, you ain't going to get it. I experienced that myself. I was told that, come on here, and we got tenure waiting for you. When I got there, I said, where's the tenure? They said, well, but the thing about the whole episode is that Cornell said that the reason he came under attack by Larry Summers is because of his position on the Palestinian question. And I said, oh, no, I don't think so. Turns out Cornell was right. But then now here is the real deal. But it turns out that Larry Summers was deep in to Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, all up in that island on the Lolita Express, you know. He rode the Lolita Express so many times, man. They stopped, you know, ride this train. He gonna ride it. He rode it till he couldn't ride no more. Down to Jeffrey Epstein's island, where they was carrying on in all kind of ways that we won't discuss. So bad that Larry Summers, and I'm so happy for him. You don't know how, I mean, I just love to see a cat like an arrogant piece of garbage being exposed. Now he down with Jeffrey Epstein. So he had to withdraw from everything. He had to get off of Microsoft's board of directors. He ain't OpenAI. He off of OpenAI. He said, I had to get out of there. I ain't gonna teach no more because I'm going into seclusion. I'm giving up all my public lecture, you know. So I'm going underground now because if I talk too much without my lawyer, all that I've been involved in is going to be exposed. You understand what I'm saying? He down with Epstein, and everybody know it.
He's now in the same club with Prince Andrew.
Well, hold it. No, hold it. Even deeper than Prince Andrews is Noam Chomsky.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, no.
Oh, you ain't heard about that?
Yeah, I have. I don't know the details. What happened with Trump?
Well, I'm gonna tell you. Now I'm gonna tell you.
Come on.
They all have the complexion,
With the connection.
but I put another thing, and the religion
Yes.
to make the connection.
Yes.
Now, Noam Chomsky, he's criticizing all over the system. Norman Finkelstein said he's the greatest intellectual in the last 1,000 years, and everybody else got to bow down. And Noam Chomsky. Come to find out, he was riding the Lolita Express, big time. And I mean, first of all, when you're down with Epstein, there are 2 things that have to be accounted for. One, Epstein was a Mossad agent.
Yes.
So Noam Chomsky running around talking about I'm an anti-Zionist, up to a point, it turns out. Okay? You was talking one way, and behind the scenes you're doing something else. The second part of it. You ride the Lolita Express. The question is, were you down with pedophilia? Did you have certain predispositions that Jeffrey Epstein fulfilled for you. Now, Noam Chomsky, hold on, wait, I'm gonna show you. See, it wasn't like Noam. See, at least Larry Summers said, "I'm gonna retreat and go underground." Noam Chomsky because Noam Chomsky likes to run off at the mouth. I said run off at the jibs, you know. He talks a lot. Oh yes, I've met with Jeffrey on many occasions. He's given me financial advice. Ha ha ha.
Right.
Financial advice.
Come on.
Oh, I've met him at his mansion in New York, where we discuss the economy, and he's more insightful than most economists, and I use that in my lectures. And then I rode the Lolita Express to the island. I've been down on the island. You understand? So, I'm, you know, please don't take this as salacious, and I'm not a professional comedian, but my point is, first of all, there is a not visible and invisible Zionist connection.
Come on.
I publicly oppose Zionism,
Yes.
but I believe in the unity of all Jews. You see what I'm saying? So while I publicly critique you, we're still on the same team, which is so disingenuous. Now, this is the quote, great Noam Chomsky. He would speak to audiences of thousands. When he would go to a university, you couldn't get in. You had to get your ticket a week in advance. You know, it's just like a Shaka Khan concert, or Earth, Wind and Fire concert. You got to get your tickets in advance. That's how big he was. You know what I'm saying? And of course, let me just give all due respect. Chomsky is a major figure in linguistics and other academic fields. His influence in academic fields such as information science, anthropology, linguistics, I guess well, a lot of times influence has to do with people who cite you because they think you are an authority, whether you're that or not. You see what I'm saying? So he's huge in that regard. It might not be all justified. But then he has, and that's big, whether it's justified or not, in academic discourses, even in some of what we're talking about, theories of complexity, theories of even this whole area, that logics and so on. He is big. He is not a small fry, and you must acknowledge that. You know what I'm saying? But then there is another Noam Chomsky, who is not the moral, disinterested social scientist. But we knew there was something going on with Chomsky. At least I felt it for a long time. You know, he'd be talking for hours, and you go on YouTube, you listen to his lectures, and it's like it's all white people, so hardly nobody never asks him about race. But he, I don't know, why should I sully my intellect talking about black people? There, you know, that kind of, unless you've experienced. I'm not, but you know what I'm talking. Y'all know what I'm talking. White people. Well, you know, I'm so above all of these Negroes. And y'all just, I try to explain this to Sabato and Porva, and they're dealing with the white man. I said, y'all don't know these people.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And well, we've been having phone discussions about it. But then when he came out and said, I can't stand to even listen to Martin Luther King's voice. I said, wait a minute, dog. Now you crossed my red line. You understand? Now you've told me something about yourself
Right.
in just that phrase. I don't need to know no more. You can't stand to listen to his voice, one of the most lyrical, poetic, insightful voices coming out of the black prophetic tradition and black struggle of resistance. You ain't resisted nothing. Turn out now that you're down with the Zionists. And then I knew. See, I guess that's what some people call the black experience. See, I don't need the white man to tell me everything. I just need you to say one thing. And then I say, oh, okay. You done told me all, and now everything else comes out. The whole thing. You was down with the Zionists. Jeffrey Epstein is not just the run-of-the-mill Zionist. He is with the Israeli state. In fact, everybody is saying it. He was a Mossad agent. Everybody know what Mossad is? It's the Israeli version of the CIA, worse than the CIA. It is Murder Incorporated.
Who all is saying that
No.
Epstein was Mossad? This is the first I heard that one. I'm not that I'm
Oh no! Oh, it's everywhere. Oh, see. Oh yeah. Let me. First of all, Tucker Carlson and them lately. They came. Oh man, Nick Fuentes and all them. They hardcore anti-Semites.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You can't. They done cross up. Now Tucker Carlson is not an open anti-Semite, but he bring anti-Semites on his show to talk for hours. You know. But see, the thing is, it's one of the. Okay, now, now we're off of this. No. That's okay. That's okay. But we're off of the top. Just put the social structure and logic side. We finished that part, so we come back to that in a minute. But you see, when Trump betrayed the thought readers in his movement and his base, when Trump said America first, and then it looked like he was putting Israel first, all them people was like Nick Fuentes, and Nick Fuentes is a young guy under 30, and he talked too much, but he talks, and he speaks emotionally. He ain't no friend of black people. But the severing of the relationship between MAGA and evangelical white Christianity and the state of Israel has been broken forever. This is huge. It is a breakdown of a fundamental relationship that the Israeli lobby and the Zionist elite of this country relied upon. Remember, there are no more than 6 or 8 million Jews in the United States. It is not enough with all the money in the world to carry all of this, politically. So they needed a base. What was the base? Evangelical Christians. And they talk a lot of mess, about Israel and the end of time and all. But the claim is that Trump betrayed the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Tucker Carlsons who believed in Make America Great. So why are you funding, and they say it like this, a genocide in Gaza? I mean, they speak they speak more strongly against a genocide or as strong as we do. And so here you get Epstein. How did he get his? The guy never graduated from college and was teaching in an elite private school in Manhattan. Then he got where he get all this money from? This mansion in Manhattan, one of the most expensive in Manhattan. And then on top of it, how you buy an island? The cat owned an island. You understand? Where did that money come from? And so it turns out several things, and this is not, it's beyond mere speculation. One, that he was drawing all these, like Prince William, like Bill Clinton, like Donald Trump, all of these high-profile people, to his parties, to his island, to his mansion, to get dirt on them. You know, in order to blackmail them to use that information for political purposes. So, and the thing was Israel first. The other thing is Jeffrey Epstein's relationship to the Israeli government. I guess the covers are now being pulled off the Israeli government. I guess it's genocide, but even things that went on before. And so Jeffrey Sachs was made this rich man because his position in the cultural life of the elite and so on. And he could, let me put it this way, he gave them what they liked. He knew what they liked. And a strong tendency of pedophilia among the elites. We cannot rule this out. And thus, when Trump was running, talking about the corrupt pedophilia elites that run the government, then when it came out that he was just talking because he was part of them, he was down there. Now, whether they got photos of him, I don't know. But they have enough photos to blackmail the elite. And this is for the purpose. This is why when you get to Noam Chomsky, why? I mean, what you doing up in here? I thought you was against the Israeli government. Well, I'm not, and I was just perpetrating. So this is. I mean, we're looking at what we could call a moral crisis of unbelievable proportions. That's what I would say. It's ugly. Oh, it's so ugly. I can't, and it's disgusting. And they ruined the lives of many children and young people. Children.
Very Catholic clergy.
Huh?
Sounds like Catholic clergy.
Catholic.
Well, definitely. Well, it turns out the elite of Western civilization. I'll stop. I mean,
I'm sorry.
no. You didn't. Because we were talking about Noam Chomsky and Lawrence Summers. And you look at Lawrence Summers, a beat down rat. All of when he was walking, when he could fire Cornel and be talk to black and see. I'm gonna tell you another thing. This practice of these white men pointing their fingers in the faces of black men. That's one of their things. And you get a Jew, the Holocaust gives me the right to point my finger in a black man's face and so on. See, they love that. That's their predisposition. You gotta do what I told. And Cornel, I mean, he got nothing. He said, man, I do what you told me to do. Get the F out of my face. You know what I'm saying? But see, then it turns out, money, you didn't have the moral high ground, no way. I don't care about the Holocaust and nothing else. You was on the Lolita Express more times than can be counted. You was up in that island. You know, and now you're like a defeated rat trying to run for cover. You look like a piece of garbage. And who you are is now manifested in your physical. It's shit knocked down.
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Karen.
So, you were saying that in modern American social systems result in defeated destruction. My question is, could it have come earlier with the defeat of the other imperial powers that were vying for land in the United States? British, French, Mexican governments. Once we dispensed with all those other imperial powers, that system was born.
Maybe. But what we know happened is that a new system, a qualitatively different system, emerges after the defeat of Reconstruction. That's a possibility, but I think more in the realm of probabilities.
We should go like that.
How, how do we relate all of this? You know, forget some of the junk. Uh, but how do we relate all of this to folks, you know, the regular people, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
without whom it seems to me you don't get, I mean, for lack of a better word, without regular people, it's kind of like a theoretical discussion. But there's got to be some muscle, you know. I think that's the reason why I talk about the fact that all of this has to boil down to what the hell we gonna do, or what the heck do we help others do, or facilitate others do. You understand where I'm coming from?
No,
This is why I asked the question.
I hear you very, you know, I would say at one level, that's a question of pedagogy.
Right.
Because, see, I don't think you can lead people just by sloganizing.
No doubt about it.
And, you know, my role model in this regard is Martin Luther King.
Good point.
You know what I'm saying? That's all I would say. And what we're trying to work out is not, you know, most people will not be immediately interested in this. Most people can become interested in it because it talks about, I mean, and we didn't work it all out today. In concrete form, what we're literally talking about is the path to the transformation of a social system that has produced for the majority of people a dark and tragic landscape. Can I just say one thing? You know, I was riding the subway here today. Ride Philadelphia subways on Saturday. The whole subway is filled with poor people. How do you know they're poor? Look at them. Ill clothed, many ill housed or not housed, and they're all on the subway and the car that I was in. And so the question becomes, how long is this sustainable?
Right.
Even without us or without what we're talking about, people are going to react. People are going to act. However, we cannot, and this is the way I feel, and I could be wrong about this. I feel that people like ourselves, the Free School and others, we have a responsibility. We're part of the people, but we're not the same as the people. There's no way in the world that I can say that I understand that young woman I'm sitting across from, who I know is poor than poor, and so that I can understand her pain. I can't understand. In fact, I would love to talk to her. You know, go ahead.
This may be going off, right? I think you're probably correct. This ain't go for interpret. I think you may be correct in terms of understanding. I do think that it is possible, without getting confused with the Lolita train. I do think it is impossible to say I love you.
I love him.
I love you. In other words, I may not understand, but I love you. And it seems to me that's what I hear in Martin, you know, time and time again, that what's necessary in terms of that struggle is that there is some kind of basis of love on on the basis of which we seek love, justice across the board. But, you know,
I would just, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no,
I would just cite some Bartow, what he cited from Martin Luther King. He said, Jesus said I should love you. He didn't say I have to like you.
yo, yeah.
So with them cats,
I ain't on about love versus like.
I knew you walked in and quiet and stuff.
I'm sorry.
Can I jump in really quick?
Go ahead, go ahead, man.
I want to give this behind the name, you know, because this is not our first time to talk about dialectics, and I'm in a unique position because the first person to teach me dialectics was a trans woman named Andrea,
Oh, yeah.
and she was Dr. She's my mentor, my first mentor before Doc, and she was from a trailer park when she grew up. And so I always took offense when people, you know, one time someone said, "Oh, let Samir speak because he's a person of color." And I took offense to that because she taught me, but she's white, but she's from a trailer park, but I'm a person of color. It's so reductive. And so
Talk about it.
I think that the reason why young people are attracted to Dr. Montero's classes and, you know, to a lesser extent, you know, Noam Chomsky and Gerald Horne is because we're looking for a logic outside of, you know, what happened to our parents. We can't follow the old logic anymore. And I wanted to comment, you know, on why we study logic, because that was your question, while also, you know, addressing, you know, docs and things I had some comments on. But, you know, it goes back to when, I remember when we first studied, you know, Hegel, and, you know, I failed calculus 3 times as template, so I consider myself an average
what, 3
calculus.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man, that's no
Three times
time.
at Temple University. So I consider myself to be on, you know, an average person's understanding of all this logic stuff. And like I said, my mentor didn't have any, you know, Ivy League education. But, you know, it brings back to when, you know, the preschool taught logic when we did Hegel that summer. And, you know, Doc described, you know, the purpose of philosophy and Clausewitz's formulation that war is politics by other means. And Doc used the transitive property to say, well, philosophy is politics. Philosophy is war by
No,
other
politics,
means.
by other
Oh, sorry, politics is war by other means. But as an extension, philosophy is part of the politics. I can't, as a young person who watched Mamdani, who watched Obama, I can't go into the next cycle with the same logic. We need an upgrade. And so, you know, my comments on the logic part, we've talked about the Enlightenment and the production of knowledge. And the Enlightenment produced, you know, 3 scholars, Freud, Marx, and Darwin, all of whom thought about knowledge rather than, you know, the traditional British way of, oh, I'm a British naturalist. Like I grew up near the James Audubon Center. And, you know, like other British naturalists, their idea of doing science was just collecting all the data that, you know, Doc talked about. The particle physics. What do particle physicists do? They study particles. They study particles by collecting all of them and enumerating all of them. But what Doc was saying was, we have to go beyond just enumerating structures. We have to understand the structures in their motion, understand changing the structures. You know, I visited Marx's.
You're saying it better than me. That's what I was trying to say, man.
No, that was awesome.
So, you know, I went to visit Marx's grave, and, you know, on his tombstone, then next to Claudia Jones, it says, you know, the purpose of the world is not to understand the world, but to change it.
That's where I am. It's the change part.
But you can't get there.
That is my bias. And I'm granted, we gotta understand what the hell it is we're up against if we don't have a meaningful chance of changing. I may be suffering from the fact that, you know, at my age,
No.
I can't afford to do a hell of a lot more than try to figure out what the hell is the quickest, what's the best way to try to move here. That's
Yeah.
probably my my major concern. If I was a bit younger, a lot younger, I might be able to, but I appreciate the conversation, that's for darn sure. I have to do that.
That's why I appreciate Desire to Preschool, because when Doc was talking about the Gerald Horne logics, I used to follow that logic, but I got in trouble with the inauguration on January, one of the January. Anyway, there are lots of opportunities for young people to get into trouble. But, the term from John was good trouble. When Doc, when I first got involved with him, that's what I thought it was about, what the preschool was more about. What I appreciate about the preschool is really the opportunity to make that revolutionary change happen. Instead of this other logic, like, I used to be a big fan of Noam Chomsky. I would use the word rock star to discuss Noam Chomsky, so it's really affected me to come out.
Well, I wanted to say, I think this conversation on logic
Could you
is
speak up a little bit?
Yeah, I was going to say this conversation about logic is really important because I think the first time when we discussed it last week, it kind of flew over my head.
Yeah.
But I think the presentation today and actually what you also added is clear because it is the study of logic also has concrete implications, which is when you look at Reconstruction, the black worker, the white worker, the planter class, it's this question of ideology. Why is it that the white worker, though their interests were more aligned with the black worker, saw themselves in the planter? And it's the same thing as, as we're studying the initialization of the 50s and 60s. Why is it the same dynamic? And I think, you asked this question about love. Honestly, for me, hearing this stuff about the ruling elite, there's no love there. I don't know, maybe I'm separate, but it's disgusting. And the priority is not love for the ruling class, but love for ordinary people.
Yeah, that's
and I think what's in the way of that unity among the people is the sense of history and the sense of what's getting in the way is not understanding how history has moved in this nation and also why things went a certain way when actually it did make sense for the white worker to be opposite with the black worker.
Please do not have any notion.
Of course.
I love the ruling class.
Of course.
I do think, and this is a black person, with all of the class crap that goes on in the black community and goes on with black people in relationship to other oppressed people, the chance for some movement and some change is some kind of struggle for each other.
But love is also contingent on ideas. How do you see each other and relate to each other?
I do. You can't see each other as human beings if they ain't love at work in mind. But I don't want to belabor it.
No. Because I think, even reflecting on my own journey through this, I feel like what initially drew me to the free school was primarily a kind of curiosity and some kind of moral searching, but it wasn't very well defined. But I think increasingly, as I've been here and also been in Philadelphia and also done stuff like the Blackwell Reading Group at the library, I think what comes to motivate even the search for knowledge is increasingly not just curiosity but love. And actually loving people, and so I think that is important. I wanted to say that I guess to go back to the Black Reconstruction thing, because I think there's a lot of people who have, especially younger people, who, like we said before, who have become very interested in Black Reconstruction specifically. And I think that one example of that is people who take this idea that Du Bois uses in Black Reconstruction of abolition democracy. He uses that term in the book. And a lot of people will kind of simplistically take that term to apply it to abolition politics today, which is anti-prisons, prison abolition, that kind of stuff. And it becomes a kind of
they interpret, like a lot of younger people, younger radicals will interpret Du Bois using the term of abolition democracy as a kind of yes or no thing, if that makes sense. Of like, oh, abolishing slavery is, that's like it becomes a very static thing, is what I'm trying to say. And what I've always felt from reading Black Reconstruction is that when Du Bois uses that term of abolition democracy, along with all the other terms of dictatorship of the Black proletariat and stuff, is that my hunch is that Du Bois uses that term to describe a movement, which was basically the anti-slavery movement. And that actually what was very clarifying from what you were saying is that certain movements, certain political movements can also become movements that restructure the social structure, if that makes sense. And actually, I really like that. And I mean, in general, I like the way that you're doing the whole, like, it's multiple logics operating at different levels of the structure, the overall structure. Like, I thought that was really great. And it burst a lot of like, light. I think.
That's the difficult part too.
But I always felt like Du Bois was using this term of abolition democracy to describe like this search for democracy and movement, which is attached to the anti-slavery movement, the anti-slavery struggle, which is both the Underground Railroad, but it's also it meets with like the abolition movement, which is, Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, John Brown, all those people. And Du Bois is describing something in motion. And related to that, one other lesson that I think a lot of like radicals or would-be radicals take from Black Reconstruction is they use it as an argument to say that the betrayal by the white worker of the Black worker was an inevitable thing.
Was inevitable.
They say it is inevitable.
Right.
And they take what Du Bois is saying as, oh, the white worker will always betray the Black worker. And I actually think that what Du Bois is actually saying in Black Reconstruction is the complete opposite, which is that it was not inevitable, and that it was contingent, and that there were actual choices involved, and that there was an actual, like, Du Bois is describing the overall book itself as something which is very fluid, and there's always this shifting and changing, and I just wanted to say that because I think that we're in a similar moment today where if you read something like Black Reconstruction as a justification of a political and ideological statement that white people always betray Black people, for example, like that becomes a self-fulfilling thing. You'll always see the world that way, and you'll basically it lapses into just a kind of static logic, like in which there is no motion in the social structure itself. And I agree that someone like Margaret Taylor Greene is an example of that. And I also wanted to say that there's even on the level of technology, maybe there could also be multiple logics, one of which is there could be the linear thing. There's this, this term of Moore's law? Have you heard of it? It's like this, I think it was maybe in like the 70s or something. Yeah, that like computer technology, but especially like the silicon chips.
Literal compute power.
Like computing power is a linear thing because there's this prediction that it would double, that computing power would double every 2 years. And so it was described as a linear logic of basically the advancement of the power of technology, of computer technology. Then with the advent of AI, these people like the Sam Altmans, whatever, they claim to have transcended Moore's law and basically to...
Oh no, I was just saying.
Yeah.
I'm just really moved by what you're saying.
Okay. And so they claim to have transcended Moore's law by saying that actually their whole basis for the development of AI is almost exponential thing, maybe.
Yeah.
Where they say if we just add exponentially like more computing power with all these data centers, which is literally the only thing that's keeping the economy, the American economy up right now, is like AI investments, data center investments. Like it actually exceeds like any person's understanding of how much money is being poured into AI data centers. But it's based off of this idea that if we exponentially increase the computing power, then we can exponentially increase the power of AI. But the funny thing is that the more money they pour into this AI, it's almost like instead of exponential growth, it's almost like diminishing returns. Because the AI, it's like they keep saying like, oh, the next version of ChatGPT will be this much better, but actually it's like, it's really disappointing and lame actually in terms of it becoming. So I just want to say that as like another example of like multiple logics operating. But I guess this is a question that I had, which was, when we talk about the color line and then the triad logic, the trilectal logic, I think it's an important question to ask of why doesn't it just become why doesn't the overall macro structure of American society just become a binary of white versus black? I think it's an important question to ask of because the implication of even the idea of a color line is of two sides, right? And so I think for me, actually, that was an open question that was raised by what you were saying, which is, okay, why doesn't the color line then just become like an overall structure of just white versus black that replaces worker versus capitalist? And why is it important to identify still the ruling elite, the white worker, and the black worker?
Yes.
So that was just an open question.
I think that's why Doc actually used the word co-structuring.
Yeah.
Right?
Co-cons. I was using, if I could just the word, constituent
Right.
has two meanings. Constituent meaning of if a political person, I'm one of his constituents. But constituent also means a part of, a constituting part of the makeup of something. And I use the word co-constituencies, which means that, at least in this triad, that all three are dynamic constituencies or constituting parts of the whole system. In fact, I would argue that all of the major, I could say, variables are co-constituencies, or I use the word structuring structures, where something is a structuring, I'll use the word force, but is also structured by the other major elements of it. So you get this constant interplay, interconnectivity. And the significance of it is to attempt to understand the social system in its dynamic form.
Can I ask a follow-up? So you had referred to this earlier about, okay, where would you place the economy in this overall thing? So I guess
I
prior...
wouldn't privilege the economy.
But I guess prior, when we first started talking about, especially Black Reconstruction and, these ideas of triads, all that, my initial understanding was that I thought that we were saying that race and capitalism are co-constituting forces in American society, that they also co-constitute each other as well. I guess, are we saying something different?
I think we are.
Okay.
And if I said that, I don't think I really meant it.
Yeah, it was my attempt to understand what we were working
because
on.
See, and I don't, I'm trying to work it out in my head. I don't have a big brain, but I was trying to look at it from a social systems perspective, which is a different perspective than a politically economic perspective. Because I think a social systems perspective looks at all elements of the system or principal elements of the system as influencing and being influenced, shaping and being shaped by. So, and the class dynamic, we could remove class from it and just say race, which is, become convenient for a lot of people. But I don't think we can avoid the class dynamic while acknowledging the race dynamic or that part, and that's what Du Bois does. He could have just said the worker and the planter, but he said the black worker, the white worker, and the planter or the capitalist. And the major, see, I don't, the words are, kind of technical. The language gets a little the structuring structures. If the black worker could be viewed as a structure, if the white worker is a structure, which means a system of relationships. Black and white worker structure, their structures that structure each other. The black and white worker dynamic is a dynamic. And it is a dynamic, as well as each side's relationship to the ruling class. And I think all of this, while setting up a systemic framework, that does not then mean that we do not have to do ongoing research.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Well, okay, the last thing I want to say was in response to Reverend Ike too, which was that I think in terms of how we approach trying to work out this knowledge, not just like in the free school, but also with the community, with people, with ordinary people. I actually, in some ways, that's kind of the way that we're approaching the Tuesday event at the library, if that makes sense. And in particular, I brought it up last week, but this essay in Darkwater of Work and Wealth is kind of in miniature the thesis of Black Reconstruction. And the way that Du Bois approaches, in a very literary way, introducing this triad of the Black worker, the white worker, and the ruling elite is, I think, the way that we try to share that with people is kind of, I see that as our way of experimenting with how can this knowledge be shared more widely, and in a way that is understandable to people, and in a way that is not just understandable, it's like, oh, I received the knowledge, but you also see yourself, like you can see yourself as part of whatever is being described, like the kind of drama that's being described.
Yeah, I wanted to attempt to take what we've been talking about, what Doc laid out, and try to kind of explain how I'm seeing it concretely. Because I also, just like Jeremiah, thought the explanation of, to me, I think the key points of one, assuming that the structures that structure social systems,
we can call it structuring structures.
the structuring structures are not, for example, like the capitalist and the worker. Like, I'm like, those aren't identities, but as structuring structures.
Yes,
That as a concept is new, indeed, because we're not talking about objects, that the objects of society are the worker and the capitalist, that they're groupings of people, but we're saying that they are in themselves structuring structures. Like that's to me, that's a key concept, because when we move into Black worker, white worker, ruling elite, we're not talking about categories to organize people, but we're talking about structuring structures in of themselves,
Of the social system.
And the way I see is that, that plus another foundational thing that I felt was and I got this from also from ChatGPT, the Contopolis book. So this guy is like a Doc's advisor from Temple, who I never took seriously because I was like, oh, whatever, he's just a Greek professor. But then actually, because Doc was like, oh, you should look at Contopolis' book, and I started reading it, and I couldn't understand it, so I was like, even though I've been rejecting Doc's proposal to use ChatGPT, I decided to ChatGPT the book, and I was like, hey, explain the main points of this book. And actually, it's really useful. I don't know how accurate it is, but it was honestly pretty useful. But I think he also says, I don't know if he invented it or where it comes from, to understand society or social systems as having multiple levels that are not hierarchical in priority. So macro, meso, micro, that even saying that there are 3 layers is not hierarchical, that the macro is most important, that the meso is second important, but actually that there are 3 equal layers all interacting with each other. It's not hierarchical. He calls it heterarchical. So like all at play of dynamics. So that includes, for example, micro, individual actions, individual people, maybe you could say families. Meso, economics, large industry system,
Yes.
the political governance system,
Mhm.
cultural systems, and the way culture is produced and
Mhm.
reproduced,
Mhm.
blah, 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 blah. You could put churches, for example, on the micro, but then you'd have to include Black theology as a meso, like,
Mhm.
and then macro would be, what we're proposing is the structures of Black worker, white worker, rulingly, which is not categories of human beings, but rather structure. I mean, you could say
This is very interesting. If I could just,
Yeah.
and you're right about that. As logic,
as logic.
you see,
Yes.
they are not the specific human being, etc.
Yeah.
But you're right.
Okay,
about
so the way I want to apply it is, oh, I'm so sad I was reading for this, but the way I wanted to apply it is, okay, like for example, my work, like I work for a labor union. Let me just take it concretely there. 'Cause for me, it helps. I'll even get personal about this. To me, it is a huge enigma to understand this is not abstract. It's as concrete as you get. I meet every day human beings who I honestly find very beautiful. Black workers from Philly, white workers from across the state who have lives and suffering, domestic violence, things that I have never had to encounter except through meeting through them. Just very, very beautiful people, not because they're physically necessarily the standard of beauty, but because they work so hard, their character, the way they treat people, the way how strong they are, how courageous they are. And they have different characteristics. The Black workers from Philly are like their own type, but then I mean, for me, it's been a revelation to even meet these white workers. Just very funny people, like who in some ways just say things like, "Yeah, my ass is fat," and like just very funny, beautiful people who work really hard and are just very rugged individuals. To me, the revolutionary political question is, because this is actually, interestingly, the sociological question that every single quote-unquote labor leader will ask, which is just take labor. Labor as a system, labor as the working class, or even the organized working class. Their consciousness and how they act. That is the question on the table, because they are a huge majority of the people. They're an active force in this country and a potentially revolutionary force. So what most people would say is like, this is what Dr. saying. If you take Marx, which is, I do think Marx and even Lenin and this broader conception of class struggle, if you believe that the macro determining structures are class, the worker and the capitalist, that is the logic of history, the logic of revolutionary change, then you would assume, just like Du Bois, that especially as things get more and more dire in this country, that it should be simple and straightforward for the Black workers and the white workers to mobilize together, because they're all pissed off at their bosses and get so angry at the billionaire class, like all the democratic socialists are saying, my union is saying, it's a new message, which is we have one enemy, the billionaire class, and we should have a revolution already. But that's not the case, because the dialectic assumes that there's something called class consciousness. Right. That consciousness defined by class. But Du Bois in some ways is saying that there's even consciousness itself is determined by a trilectic structuring of structures. Black worker, white worker, capitalist. And I don't know this is kind of an open question, but I even think it's interesting of like, does that mean people's consciousness themselves are shaped by a trilectic? Like the relationship that people's consciousnesses themselves and hence their actions, how they choose to act, in of itself is shaped not just by like oppressed, oppressor, capitalist, proletariat, but rather even like, for example, like one of my members in Philly, that they're constantly measuring in their consciousness the trilectic of the white worker, Black worker, and capitalist. It's not as simple as I have a Black worker structuring structure on my consciousness, but rather it's the trilectic dynamism of the two. But the example of the layer thing is that my union does this all the time. You reduce, for example, the white members from many different areas, rural areas, post-industrial areas, deindustrialized areas of Pennsylvania. You reduce them to their wages, and you reduce to their interest and wages. You either reduce them to economic actors, economic people who are acting on economic agency of like, I will just do whatever is in the best interest of my wages, or you reduce them to their anger at their boss, which is a real anger, but you make their consciousness is determined by an assumption of anger at the billionaire class. Versus, but that doesn't explain, for example, not just conscious, but doesn't explain the way multiple layers of the social system interact. Because because there's an assumption that a white worker, one of my white members, for example, is just a quote unquote white worker. There's an assumption that they are not, for example, that they are just who they are at their job, that they're not also religion, or the assumption of religion's impact on their action or inaction, change or lack of change, things like that. And the best example is, for example, the most dynamic section of society, the Black worker, which is, there's always this assumption in my union that especially the Black workers, that all you need to do is get them angry enough to act. And there's always that assumption. But actually, in fact, I say this all the time, but there's this story all the time, but I will never forget when one of my members, like when I basically was talking about like, how do you basically get through each day? She said, oh, I just think of two things. I think of Jesus and I think of Martin Luther King Jr. Like the way that many different layers, things like church systems, family, children, like things like, like not just church itself, but the imaginary that comes from a theology, a certain story of yourself, like Jesus, things like, basically that there are many different layers at play that impact the consciousness and the action of people. And the reason why I find this important is that it helps explain, for example, it's not answering what you're asking, Jeremiah, but I think what you asked is a good question of like, which is basically when we talk about, like, for example, even someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a qualitative, who represents something so qualitatively different in the history, like in the history of U.S. or like in the history of the U.S. She's representing something, a shift in something. That we're basically also saying that there are the logics of history are like, I'm not going to be able to describe this well, but basically like, it's not top down, where just because Marjorie Taylor Greene is like comes from a white working class district, that she's gonna act like a white but rather that many different layers and forces at play, including chance, including her going to prison, going to visit the January 6th prisoners and looking at the final call and being like, oh, I'm down with I'm down. Whoever approves the final call, I agree with whatever they said. Yeah, that's Marjorie Taylor Greene. She was the one that said that. She said that she was like, I really like the final call. That all these layers throughout, and we don't exactly even know how exactly they're interacting, but that there are multiple layers that are even producing changes to even the macro or the meso. I feel like I didn't describe it the best, but that was my attempt at making it concrete.
The only thing I was just gonna add, because I'm trying to process everything you're saying, but with this whole discussion, okay, I'll just narrow down to just how, otherwise I'm gonna lose my train of thought. Like the only thing that in my brief skimming of your advisor, Kyriakos Kontopoulos' book, and when I just read his conclusion, I'm sorry, I should have read the whole book. But then I try to jump to his conclusion, and then just to amplify what you're saying about the hierarchy, it's kind of a weird concept, but like the idea that there are multiple levels, but it's not complete chaos or like everything is everything. And yet there's still ways in which these layers are interacting, the meso, the micro, the macro. And then the one thing I was just gonna add is that he believes that the best kind of social theory or logic to explain possibilities of social change is, as you're saying, ground up. It has to be upward. He's not interested in theories that only do a top down, like, oh, everything's just going to be structured by this top down. But he's actually really interested in the upward. And that's what I feel like is happening with, like, the example Emily, you're bringing up in terms of like, we have to not just see like the labor leaders and like, like the change is going to only come from like the Democratic Party, but like actually workers and their consciousness from the ground up are going to be able to, with all these interacting layers, like create more possibilities for social change. And that is actually through something of chance, and then also like that ordinary people's consciousness have a role to play in actually determining history and are just as important, if not more important, honestly, than like class or like not class, like the economy or these like concrete factors. Yeah, I thought that it was, I did feel like we have made leaps from last week that have concretized what we're saying a lot more, and also built upon what we're trying to do, and also clarified even the purpose of the study of logic, which, I mean, yeah, I can tell you worked really hard to prepare the presentation that you did, because
It's so hard.
yeah, you definitely did not give, you didn't just give the same presentation you gave last week. It was definitely not just one, but multiple leaps forward, I feel like, and it's still things that we have to work out continually, but then something really brief. I don't really feel like I'm properly able to like say everything on this topic, but in relation to how we're talking about multiple kinds of logic, building upon, but also not say satisfied entirely with like dialectics is like explaining everything, but it is still, has a role in, explaining relationship between cues within a larger structure that is more complex. So there is a place for, there's some kind of place for dialectics, but we do need to understand how trialectics, there's always a third thing or like something larger also, influencing the way in which like, yes, even if like a white work and the ruling elite are conversing or thinking, maybe they're both still thinking about the black worker. The black worker is not absent in that equation. Like, in fact, it is actually very much present. And that's what I liked about what you said about even if the black worker is quote unquote pushed to the margins of society, I don't think it's, and this is something that's come up recently, some dialogues I've been having with like coworkers about like, what kind of DEI language should we continue to use in this time of like anti-DEI Trump, and then they're like continue to try to use marginalized. I'm like, that doesn't really sit well with me at all. Like, I don't feel like we say anything when we say marginalized, because what if it is that the black worker is at the center, even if not every time, if like the black worker is not quote unquote present in a room where the white worker is in dialogue with the black worker. There's something about the white worker looking to the black worker to like look for ways of revolutionary or transformative ways of actually moving forward. And maybe the ruling elite is also keeping the black worker in mind in terms of like what they would not want the white worker to aspire to be. So, and then the last thing I was going to say is it was helpful to hear you say that revolutionaries do study logic. A real revolutionary studies logic, always to identify, a pathway to actually understanding human social change at the total and systemic levels. It is those who don't study logic that kind of reveal themselves to be progressive liberals, but while they masquerade sometimes as revolutionaries, and yet nowadays you talk to any like nonprofit, they always have what they call a logic or theory of change. But it's always policy. It's always some pragmatic solution. And if we do X, Y, Z, like ABC will happen, and it's like very pragmatic in that way. Actually, to develop a logic of change, a logic of social change is pretty important, because that's what you were saying about Marx's interrogation of Hegel, Lenin's notebooks on Hegelian logic. And then when you mentioned like C.L.R. James's, treatises on like Hegelian dialectics, I know if we had to go back to even some of us, in Fighting the Free School, our curiosity for a broader kind of education, a broader kind of knowledge of how revolution actually works, that is also rooted in the people. We read, some of C.L.R. James's close companions, Grace and Jimmy Boggs, who also were very much immersed in dialectics, given, I guess, their Trotskyite background. Although them being in Detroit means that they were very close to the black workers of, Detroit motor factories. And I remember now, like, Grace would talk about in her autobiography, like, dialectical humanism. And then, I mean, I'm thinking about it more and more, but there is something both, like, that was appealing to us for a while, because we would read and be like, well, this is much closer to, like, what we'd rather study than dialectical materialism. Why are we not focused on actually studying human agency in throughout history?
Yeah.
Like, we actually want to learn it. We want to actually study the human being and, like, the dialectical transformation of human beings as dynamic forces that can actually play a role. It's not just about materialism. But that's where I feel that we have a strong hand. And I'm not certain always, like, maybe Grace and Jimmy were close to some of these ideas, but this idea of, like, taking Du Bois seriously, the idea of a trialectic, and to know that, like, yes, and the trialectic is also, like, something of a human, the unit is still a human.
It's still human and social. That's right.
And social. So I'm just reminded that, like, our own journeys have been interwoven with the search for logic, but also theories of change that make this conversation not feel like it came out of nowhere, but building off of all the things that we've been studying in free school up until now, and again, the purpose for this discussion. I could say that, but I'll stop there.
Good, Kenzie.
Oh, no, actually, I want to connect what was said. It started to make me think, well, what helped me understand that word logic really? Because a lot of times when you hear it, you take it for granted.
Yes.
But I had 3 people, and Tony knows these people, that made me understand that, and also question academia, meaning logic as it's projected, like we talked about Temple and all these sex scandals, and I don't know, I shouldn't bring that, but I learned how to look at the university different. Number one, the doctor, of course, before he went to Temple. Now, some people think he learned to write from going to Temple. When he wrote that way, all of me looking at, I remember his early writings was like that. But I always noticed by Tony, he always called the spade a spade. And he always made, whenever we had personal discussions, this before Temple, he was one. Now, my street connection was Brother Daoud. Daoud Chabrera went to Catholic school, prep boy.
Oh, Daoud, that Daoud.
Remember? Yeah, very light color, had red hair. Everybody thought he was they didn't know what his ethnicity was. But he went rogue. He reminded me of Gandhi, who went from wearing suits and ties, and then he started wearing Rambo-like clothes. But what was interesting, he was rooted in Greek philosophy, Hegel. That was the first, he used to read Plato's Republic, and he would be talking stuff.
Right.
And he played the piano. His favorite piece was the Rachmaninoff Third Concerto. But halfway through his life, he went on to be a conga player. That was his way of demonstrating his cultural resistance. Basically, going from being someone that's supposed to be white or moving to whiteness, he rebelled, and everybody was upset. His mother was upset. Well, why are you acting like this? But he was very, we used to listen to, he never studied classical music formally, but he taught himself. Like Chopin, what have you. But then went over to the drums. Second person was Polani Adetun.
Oh, yes.
Was a ballet dancer. You know, nutcracker, the whole thing. Next thing you know, Polani goes out of town, comes back in, she's dressed very African, and she's dancing African dances. So what I noticed, my exposure to this logical thinking was, you know, you have to take the bull by the horns, and you can take this knowledge, like we get from free school, and then you can perform it. Just recently, Sarah T and I had started rehearsing, and it came up at one of our rehearsals, should we include the thematic issues at the preschool in our performance practice? And I said, well, why don't we just get to know each other first?
Yes.
And then later, you know, we can use you as do a little showcase for you, what have you. The thing I want to say about the preschool would help me because and it gets into what the Reverend was talking about. Well, what about how do you make change outside? We're talking about we talking about recruitment, or what are we talking about? Spreading the word. Well, we can do it through the arts. We preschool. Like say Sarah and I go do a performance at a church or what have you, and then mention the fact, oh, we're from the preschool. Not that we're proselytizing, but we can just indirectly through performance, and people say, oh, well, where do you, people, where, I said, we're down at Apron Famous. So there are different ways to promote what's going on here. And that issue, and I just want to talk about logic, what I learned from the preschool was through basic logical thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's simple. What I learned from Tony is you don't have to look at wisdom. You can just look, like when you look at, when I did research on antebellum plantation life, and then through Tony I started looking at Reconstruction, the first thing you see, well, these are really doggish people. The people already been beat down. They get a little something, you take that away, and you create all these structures that 100 years of just putting monkey wrenches. That's logical thinking. You don't have to be a wizard to figure that out. And you did the presentation. I think you really, not that you dumbed it down, but you made it accessible to people who are not used to thinking that way. And thinking that way outside of this type of irrational, corrupt academics. See, you start bringing up memories of all these PhDs who are on the down low. No, that's Epstein thing, and I started thinking about Temple.
Yeah.
All these people I thought were
Right.
they were very kinky.
Yeah.
You know, and those scandals, or you see them coming walking out of a gay bar, or holding hands with the boyfriend, but then talking all this stuff. Noam Chomsky came up, linguistics, like you said. Oh, he was a god.
Yeah.
But I always was suspicious of him. Other than the natural language. Yeah, I'm not going to go into that, but I just want to say, you did a very good presentation of, I don't know what happened last week, but this week. And it's only because I had access to him way before you did that I think I can digest it in one sitting. So I know what you mean, but you did it very well.
Could you tell me, you invoked Daoud and Fulani. Could you tell me once again, why you invoked them?
Yeah, well, what it is, both were very immersed in European culture. Daoud wanted to be a consul general, self-made. He actually came out of anthropology. He went to I met him at Temple. He used to practice, and I thought he studied there. And I watched his transformation from thinking rock and roll was the wonder of the world to West African drumming was the essence of life. For Lami, the Nutcracker she was pursuing ballet. And she woke up one day and said, no, the essence of dance is in Africa. So I was encouraged to start looking at cultural practices, not so much color. And I started looking at the different ways people dance, is I could identify Congolese movements and hips and things like that. So both of them made me, and Daoud started to play, see, some drummers will play like they playing a beat on the drum, but it's not from a particular culture. Brother Daoud used to listen to drumming from Guinea, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, the Congo. And he said, oh, here's the Kabilte, here's the this and that, the other. So he became immersed. So he took all the European training of compartmentalizing and delineating, and he used it with Africa. You never know that man walking around looking like Rambo was pursuing to be and came out of Catholic school. West Catholic, praying every day to Jesus or what have you. And he left it. Fulani, the common denominator was Fulani. You see somebody one time, they're one way, they're white as snow, and the next thing you see that black is taught. Meaning in the sense of the mindset change. And then remember for Mama's dress style, you remember probably she was wearing more
Yeah,
African.
and Falami was a very dark-skinned woman.
Oh yeah, and extremely intelligent.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and what another thing happened to both of them mentally, I think, see, if you don't have, if you become Afrocentric or something, or you start rebelling, do you have an outlet that allow you to sustain yourself economically? Both of these people actually did everything but become homeless.
I'm still, and both of them are dead.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, she died?
I would assume so.
Yeah, but yeah, and Dowd had a grave. He didn't want a church funeral. He told his sister he wanted a graveside funeral. He didn't want any prayers because he was I don't want to say atheist, but he went through that questioning the existence of God. That was started with that. Coming from the Catholic school, then you question God. You play a piano, then you play a drum, then you just go off the people.
Yeah, then you just go off the deep end.
Yeah, he went, but all these people, see, you can be very logical thinking and very intelligent, but how do you share it with ordinary
But this
people?
is-
So when you go too far off, you can lose people and take them away. Yeah.
Okay.
Is Dawood from preschool the guy?
No. This is a different Daoud. What was Daoud's original name?
It's been so long.
Yeah,
I know he went by Dowd Shabuera, but well, some people knew him as David Bivens. Some people knew him as David Cord. Yeah, he had that, but
When
that
he
was
said
so
he was
long ago.
when he said he was dressing like Rambo, he got into weightlifting, and then he wore, cut so you could see his muscles.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Oh, I thought it was a revolutionary act.
No, it was a radical shift of identities.
Yeah, coming
Where they-
from Catholics who wear the suit and tie, praying to Jesus,
Yeah.
to and see, classical music, most of the classical composers were very secular. Half of them were atheists. They didn't say they were not. So he started to question the existence of God because he read Hegel, Nietzsche, all those names. The second time I heard those names were through Tony, but Plato's Republic, Aristotle.
He was
He
like
read all
that.
that stuff.
Yeah.
And he read Freud, and his famous volume in Freud was about the slave. I don't know how many volumes it was, but so he's like Tony, but he wasn't as, how do you say, inviting as Tony. He kind of chased people away.
And disorganized in his life.
Yeah.
He would always ride a bicycle, and he abandoned the material things of life
Yes.
and just became bohemian and yeah.
Yeah, he degenerated. This is what I mean by having all this
And
knowledge.
they were almost homeless.
How do you present yourself? You meet somebody, do you chase someone away because you look like a bohemian?
I know the type, especially in my generation, of people who have no business being bohemian and ended up projecting everything. I think it relates to what we were talking about with Gerald Horne and the pessimism and especially Black users.
This is interesting. Can I just say, this is very interesting. If I might just interrupt you, because last week we talked about how the personality is shaped by certain ideas or certain ruptures in life. And for example, if I listen to Gerald, I feel that there's a certain personality deterioration. And with the two people that he's talking about, whom I know, I knew Falami much better, but they suffered a personality deterioration.
Yes.
And I know Daoud had cancer, but he wouldn't get treated for it.
No.
You know what I'm saying? It was, so that,
Yeah.
you know, it's a very, I would say just one, one of the things that I think is very important is that you cannot separate yourself from the world. That even as we discuss these difficult theoretical, philosophical questions, it is not to separate ourselves from the world, but to engage the world at a new level of consciousness. And it's possible, and it makes all, to me, it makes all the sense in the world, because you can live better in the world if you understand the world that you live in. You know, if you can't understand the world, if the world becomes so confusing and so can't be understood, it affects your personality over time. And you could, by the way, you can see it in a lot of young people, the mental illness problem. You can see it in children, a world that can't be explained. And thus, it affects personality formation or personality undoing. And the personality can be and we, that's what we saw. And that's what we saw with Rena and Andrea, who were just activists, and suddenly you don't even know where they are anymore.
Yeah, and it's reminds me of what Mark said. Theory in the hands of the people becomes a material force.
No, Frank, that's how, Mark. Yeah.
And we were talking about layered logic and the mesosphere, and how the ideological superstructures influence people.
And I didn't
on
use the concept
level.
ideological superstructure, but you can.
Okay.
No, I'm just saying I didn't for
Okay.
specific reasons.
Oh, okay.
The reason, if I could just, the reason I didn't use that formulation is because, as she said, it's hierarchical.
Right.
The problem of hierarchies and the assumption of the inevitability of hierarchies. If you listen to a lot of, I don't know if anybody even takes sociology these days. I don't know why they would, but the inevitability of hierarchies suggests that the logics of social relationships lead inevitably to hierarchies. You know what I'm saying? And therefore, to study society is to study hierarchies. And just one small thing. And what Pantopoulos says is that to study society is to study them in heterarchy. In other words, many interacting conditions of formation of social relationships. Let me just, I know I'm not making a lot of sense all the time. See, the thing is, in this area of sociological theory, is to study the formation of social structures and social relations, not to observe their static, quote, final form as hierarchies. The ruling class is the ruling class, and the rest of us are whatever. Or gender as a study of gender hierarchies, race as a study of racial hierarchies. What we're saying, and what Pantopoulos is saying, that the study of social structure is the study of the formation, reformation, and transformation of social structure, including the revolutionary transformation, which the reason by the way, I just want to make clear that we're talking about the democratic reconstituting of the whole social system, which I see just in my own mind. I can easily visualize, But anyway, I'm sorry. Forgive me, Samir.
That people automatically think higher.
Yeah.
Automatically what?
Think higher.
Yeah, automatically.
Yeah. Versus more.
That's my point. More rather than an interplay, an interaction of hierarchies and non-hierarchies. but hierarchy is not inevitable. I'll put it that way.
I was definitely doing that.
No.
No, I definitely was doing that. And, I wanted to say quick two things I had so many others, I had this all planned out, Doctor, for you. No, I needed to hear it because I definitely was being hierarchical. But it's interesting because goes back to Noam Chomsky and Gerald Horne, a study of hierarchy, coming to the conclusions of the hierarchy,
Yes.
and then becoming pessimistic that nothing can be done.
Right.
And then there are no outcomes, so then you can't see a way out as a public intellectual.
Absolutely.
The other thing I want to say is sometimes you get in this conversation in physics and mathematics and shapes and geometric. And I sort of in your earlier lecture you were saying I'm having so much difficulty explaining to you, and it's sort of like the same difficulty of explaining a fourth dimensional shape to someone. And how can you imagine a fourth dimensional shape if the person imagining it has never seen it? And what we're trying to do is what mathematicians do with topology and shapes, explain arithmetic relationships, except we're talking about relationships between people. Quick aside, I was interested in numerology for a brief second and Kabbalah, and I was very curious about why do ancient people attribute qualities to numbers. And my reductive quick sociological analysis, anthropological analysis, is that people would anthropomorphize numbers, meaning they gave them numbers, human qualities. So 3 in Islam especially, there are 99, but these numbers mean something other than just the arithmetic. So for example, 7 days doesn't mean God is omniscient, omnipotent. God didn't need 7 days to create a universe. Therefore, okay. So that aside, that was quick.
Wait,
we're talking about
what number did you actually come up with so you played it?
which number?
Yeah, in your dream, did you come up with?
No, I didn't come up with
three
any
numbers.
No number. Mostly prime numbers. If you want to study ancient understanding, no.
That was way.
But the importance of numbers when we as social scientists talk about numbers or calculus or physics is that we're talking about relationships. But when people talk, physicists have a lot of street cred in the science world because their science, quote unquote, is the most pure. It's most related to mathematics. And then you get chemistry from physics, you get biology from sort of like Marx said, ascend to the concrete. Most people want to ascend to physics. But the argument being made here today is that we as social scientists have a right to criticize mathematics. I'm influenced by the lecture that Raju's dad did on decolonizing mathematics. When we undo and tease out the assumptions of the underlying logic, it allows us to better understand, what's going on. And then the last thing I wanted to say was to Fatih that I'm down with using art as a message to recruit people, but sometimes I feel like, especially in the NGO world, it becomes just about art and just about recruiting, and it doesn't become about, it loses its politics. Because I'm interested in understanding people and organizations in the course of their development. And so, when we're talking about people who have been revolutionary and then lost their minds, when we're talking about the history of organizations like Workers' World Party or the Communist Party, American Communist Party, we're understanding organizations in the course of their development. It's just my opinion that sometimes people or organizations get caught up in just a recruiting thing. And so sometimes I think that it's okay that the free school doesn't think about itself quantitatively or qualitatively. What does the free school give to people? And that should be the category that we.
Oh, I agree. Matter of fact, if you remember, I said, Seraphine and I talked, said, should we incorporate that dimension or should we just do our thing? But see, the thing about musicians is very unstable when it comes to following someone else's logic. Look at Alfred. He was a hired hand. He wasn't from the free school, but the thing is, that is 99% of musicians I know, they pay to play, as they say. You know, now, as I said, it's not that she and I are gonna say, oh, one day we're gonna do something and promote the preschool. If, for instance, we do something like my man's gone now, okay, the composer was Jewish, but what's black about that? Okay, the Nina Simone arrangement. So she and I pick things that turn us on. Now, if the preschool can, if somebody just says, oh, you two are connected, it would be more indirected. And like I said, when she and I talked, I just said, should we do that? She said, well, what do you think? So it is not, but I know exactly what you mean. It's like a church choir, a gospel choir, who thinking they're promoting God, but actually they want to get gigs or tithe, whatever they do to get money.
Right.
But that is the main. That the goal is to be well known. See, musicians deep down inside want to be loved, and they want to bring people together.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically. So if you have it in mind, oh, I'm just going to be into a black thing or white thing, most musicians don't think that way. Yeah. Now, what happens when they become politicized or something, then they say, like some of the African American people with the drum, okay, they're angry, so they're going to beat on the drum, and I'm going to be black. But I say 98% just, they have this deep desire of wanting somebody to come towards you and just say, oh, you made me feel good today. That overrides everything. And Serafina will tell you that little conversation we had, I just proposed it. I said, should we? And she said, what do you think? So we left it alone. We didn't really decide.
Mhm.
But I definitely agree with you.
Let me let Michelle and then Blaze.
So it's not a full thought, but I actually wanted to pose a question back to you, which is if you could talk a little bit more about the relationship between logic and sociology. And how the two work together to advance social science. Because what was helpful for me about
See you on Tuesday.
what was helpful for me about the way you laid out logic was the specificity, and especially the parts where you had described Mondani was really useful, where he talks about poverty and war actually, but in terms of affordability, and where legislation and policy can be wielded to reform the system without actually changing the system. And in his logic, there is no such thing as the color line being on par with economy or like with economics or capitalism. And like the way that, so what I connected it to was something that Herba Murray and I have been talking about recently, which is why we find ideological or political struggle at Penn very difficult.
Yeah.
And I think that I've always known that students from their first year at Penn are given very strong assumptions by the university to inherit. And I've seen that change many, 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 many times qualitatively in their consciousness that occurs over the course of 4 years. And every year looks different. Year 1 to 2 is a drastic change. 3 to 4 is a crystallization. I've seen it so many times. But I want to ask that question about logic and sociology because I think it even helps me understand something better about, again, like political struggle at a place like Penn, where it's not just assumptions, but it is such a strong logic that you take on that is so difficult to be broken. And the logical relationship that I see play out a lot of the time is that the student wants to struggle against the terms of the university. And so they make honest attempts to do so, be it through activism or leaving campus, whatever, like always just this 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And the difficulty is that you can actually never be free as a Penn student until you find the color line and the way that it conditions your entire experience of reality. Yeah. And then you get into ideology in the city and how difficult bad faith actors make it for students to actually find that connection. But then this is how so that's how I make sense of the logic piece. But then how I make sense of the sociology piece is a lot of what we can witness about this young generation in our 2 years reading with the students. And there is some new, like what we saw was that there is a new consciousness among young people. And I'll even give an example, is like there was one young white student who had raised the existential moral question of being white or rejecting everything that makes him white in a way that I had never heard before, and that I don't think would have been possible when we first started noticing 2019. And I think it has to do with the way the world has changed, but also the way that ideas such like those of identity politics have less of a stronghold on the students today. And so Herman Nuri and I, like, we were talking about this because when we first started Lotus at the start of the year of James Baldwin, I think we were so impressed by the consciousness of the students. And there were even students, I mean, the way they grappled with issues of, even I remember there was a student who would talk about social time and historical time, the way we had talked about in the Winston conference, and how quick, they were mostly freshmen at this time, how quick their intellect was to pick up on the moral, the existential questions of our time, the zeitgeist. And for me, like, my instinct is just that I want to clarify something about the marriage of logic and sociology, because I don't think we figured it out yet, why politics is so difficult at home.
I would just quickly, because I know Blaze has to say something, I would say logic and social structure. All of this is sociology and sociological theory, but it is not the sociology that most people are familiar with, or most professors of sociology are familiar with. It is a particular area, but a very rich area of social theory. And the logic is the logic of social structure. Logic meaning the movement processes of social structures coming into being transformed, or even disintegrating. It is the study of, I guess, what we would call law or regularity in the formation, restructuring, transformation of social structure. And that's what, and this book by Pantopoulos is kind of an encyclopedia of the wide area of theorizing about structuring, social structuring. And it's a lot to it. But the two other areas of logic's relationship, the relationship of logic to epistemology, which is a huge area, mainly in philosophy, I think basically unexplored. However, the place where I have seen it most investigated is in the Soviet Academy, where they have looked, I think in a very productive and rich way, at the relationship of logic or logics and knowing, or theories of knowing. And the other is the relationship of logic as a method of investigation, its relationship to ideology. And I think all of this, in some ways, is what we've been trying to do today. Is, and I know myself, I haven't made it these different relationships clear enough. In some way, it's because I'm not clear enough for me. But I'm more connected to the sociological theory that links the logic of social structures, macro, meso, micro structures, the logics of that, logic and social structure. By the way, at the beginning of the book, Pantopoulos says, and this is absolutely true, in sociology, there's been an almost complete abandonment of the study of social structure. I mean, I don't know what sociology is about anymore, to tell you the truth. But this thing of logic and epistemology, the Soviet Academy, and I know this book, which I'm going to loan to you, and the Great Soviet Encyclopedia and other books, some of which I've loaned to Purga.
Hard books.
And of course, the relationship of logic to ideology, which is really a profound thing, because, you know, ideology has to do with your basic worldview about the world, about society, about the possibility of society. You know, not so much this narrow definition of ideology, but that kind of will shape the way you deploy logics. You know, can I give just one example of this? For example, you take the whole AI, Silicon Valley, Peter Thiel, and all of those people, their worldview, their ideology shapes their deployment of logic. You know, just like me and Emily been going through this. Different AI platforms have different biases,
Right.
and you can ask the same question to Gemini, to Chat, to DeepSeek, and you get very different answers. You know?
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting case study.
Yeah. I think it's a case study.
Yeah, that's actually-
And if they keep talking about AI as though it is non-ideologic, non-biased,
Yes, right.
and it's very biased, you know?
And how it weighs and accounts for what it would consider sources, but really it's examining relationships between different levels of structures of information.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, that was a great
Structures
example.
of information.
Yeah, that
This
was a
is
great
very important.
Because we did this last night with Pantopoulos' book.
Yeah.
Well, because I'm a skeptic. I have to say, I have been a big skeptic of Doc's methodology. In fact, I've been secretly antagonistic about it. But now it's publicly antagonistic, just how much you rely on AI.
Yeah.
But
It's not a lot.
But actually, no, it's true. DeepSeek versus Gemini. Well, Doc didn't realize Gemini was Google's AI. So DeepSeek versus Gemini versus ChatGPT versus. No, we didn't do that one. But basically, because Gemini will tell you it will give you a little window of its logic.
Yeah.
It'll tell you where it's pulling, not just the data sources of where it's pulling from, but basically in some ways the subliminal messaging is it's both what it's accounting for and how it's weighing, prioritizing certain relationships between sources to explain how it's coming up with the final result. Its explanation of XYZ is Gemini.
Oh yeah, Gemini. Very.
Yeah, and so Doc actually prefers Gemini the most between the three. ChatGPT.
I like both of them. Well, go ahead.
Well, last night you said Gemini.
Well, you can see,
It's okay.
you can see that you can see example of that if you look at the language that Gemini uses. I mean, I don't think you've ever used the word decolonizing knowledge, right?
No.
But you know, if you look up anti-Montairean dialectics or something, they sort of make these associations with other relevant sources and
Well, just like with ChatGPT or DeepSeek, well, definitely you have to tell it he doesn't use this, and then it'll redo it and say, "Oh, yes, But yeah, in other words, it can learn at a basic level.
But
It isn't, well, we can table this, but it was just a question that popped up in the initial presentation for me, was that we use the word civilization a lot in peaceful discussions, multi-civilizational unity or civilization and potentiality. And I was wondering, what is the relationship between civilization and the logics of social systems that are part of that? And then I was wondering, as Kathy was talking about Pantopoulos and different work,
if that hierarchy, things coming from the bottom up having.
Well, hierarchy is coming from both.
Okay,
It's hetero rather than one, top down. When you say hierarchy, we're talking about multiple interactions rather than a one way. So it's bottom up, but it's also at the same time top down.
And from middle to up.
Middle,
Yeah.
that's right, that's
But I
right.
think what Kathy was referencing was the concept of emergence, actually.
Yeah, that's emergence. Yeah.
I was wondering, is that a
Yeah,
civilization
uh-huh.
way to think about hierarchy?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Civilization is coming from the people.
See, this is a question, and it was in part raised by Eddie last week, the initial conditions. And that's a hard one. What are the initial conditions for the post-Reconstruction American social system?
Yes.
You know, or do we have to account for initial conditions to talk about it? And that's, I think a lot of this is the art of social research as well as the logic of it. You know what I'm saying? And so it would be difficult. A lot would have to rest upon what the researchers are trying to get at and whether or not they have to account for initial conditions. But I think it's, and you know, Blake, I don't know. I don't know, you know. I think in a lot of ways the American situation forces you to account for it at some point, either initially or at some point in the process of explaining the social system. You know what I'm saying? Where you have to then say, well, a lot of this can only be explained using civilizational predispositions.
Is that a different logic?
No, I don't think it's I think it's in the logic of explanation. You know what I'm saying? Let me give you an example. And I think we do this all the time. I've been close to doing it all the time. We talk about, for instance, we talk about a white supremacist social system, which is not the macro system, but it is a part of it, and the black social system that are connected in a lot of ways to civilizational assumptions. Or we can account for them in that way. So the logic of investigation is very complicated, very, I would say, subjective. You know, it is what the researchers are trying to get at, and when they run up against, let's say, a problem in explanation, they might say, well, we should bring in civilization or deeper assumptions that are not readily explained in the social system. And we could run through like hierarchy, emergence, complexity, all of these things that we've been talking about, and still not get at what we might be trying to explain. You know what I'm saying? And there's always that, you know, problem. It's not a problem, it's the reality of scientific investigation. But, you know, one of the things, and I'll just end on, I try to define this as a purposeful, well, what did I say? I wanted to, a purposeful study of social systems and their transformation. I wanted to use the word purposeful. There is a purpose to this. It is not just to have information or to be, you know, someone. The purpose is to understand social complexity and social structural transformation. Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Blaze. That's what. But I thought you were asked a question about pedagogy, the pedagogy of all of this, which is another part of it. You know, because if you can't explain it in a convincing way to people, it's just a couple of people sitting around
Right.
running off at the mouth. So we need a mechanism, which I call pedagogy, to connect these ideas to the people. Oh, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, okay, I can go. Actually, yeah, something that, I mean, what Blaze was asking made me also, because I've been trying to think about the whole discussion, and I think it's very important. I thought a couple of things that you mentioned at the start were very, like to make this distinction between logic as the laws of movements of
Yes.
society and logic as a means of investigation.
Yes,
I think
yes.
this distinction, I mean, I've been thinking about it because for instance, in the natural sciences, I think this distinction is, I don't think it's understood because people used to talk about why mathematics works in some ways. Like is the nature of the universe, is the nature of the real world, does that obey the logic of math? Or how do we do science? How do we do natural science? Because mathematics in some ways, I mean, I think it is in some ways the language of investigation.
Can I ask a question? I mean, or is it the default?
Right.
Like with string theory, it no longer was attempting to explain subatomic particles and particles, but it then became mathematics. It was a default. I'm sorry.
Right. No, but I think you're right, because I mean the fact that we have been talking about string theory and so on for quite some time is because even natural science has come up to some sort of a ceiling that it can't move forward without solving this question.
Yes.
But I think for our purpose, when we're trying to study social systems, I think this distinction becomes very important and this is a distinction that I think that only Du Bois is working out, because I think this is what also Blaise was saying, that the civilizational question, because I think what we are trying to see, or what the logic of social transformation in America has been, is that at every point you have okay, starting from Hegel, for instance, you have this whole idea of the contradiction between two opposites, and this idea of the unity of opposites, all of which is still contained in European civilization. It comes out of one system of thought. But then I think in America you have the necessity of somebody of a different worldview, which has to actually see it, which has to observe it. So it's a different civilization that is actually looking at it, that is looking at even looking at this contrast between the white, the planter and the white worker, and so on. And basically in America you have had the possibility of going outside the problem in order to look at it. And I'm not trying to say anything complex or anything. I think it's similar to actually how Baldwin talks about the blues, that yes, you are talking about the white world and what it does to you. You are talking about the pain, but then you're not simply reacting to it. You can try to see yourself outside of it so that you can comment on it. You can like the way he puts it. And I think this is in some ways what we are trying to do, what Du Bois is trying to do. And this is, I think this has been possible here, and only Du Bois can do it because he's always looking at, this is what Blaise was saying, an alternative civilizational worldview that can actually look at this distinction, that can look at what comes out of white civilization. And therefore it's not simply a logic that is contained in white civilization, because I do think that dialectical logic also comes out of the European Enlightenment. This is what we've been studying for all these years. But I don't think the idea of trialectics is merely one. It's not simply a question of rejecting the ones or the twos, but it's transcending it. I think we're also saying that as we are moving, as the history of human consciousness moves forward, I think this is the time where new kinds of thinking come out because of the possibilities of,
Yeah.
because of the possibilities of,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, intercivilizational unity, but basically the possibility of a civilization that can actually look, like the way Dubois talks about it, that can look at another civilization from behind, from the sides, from the back. The way, the way he talks about, like, how he can see white souls, and when he's talking about white souls, he's talking about white thought. He's talking about how the logic of, like how just the worldview and the logic which is contained in it, how that looks like to someone outside of it. And but I mean, I was saying this because I know, I think because this is very deep, because I mean, even this thing that you said about complexity, I think because how I think you were saying how complexity is avoided at all costs when you talk about social relations and so on. But on the other hand, you talk about the individual, and that's where all kinds of complexity is thrown in through postmodernism. So you're made to think of the individual as this like complex and unknowable entity, which with all kinds of complexifications and so on and so forth. I'm not going to try to use that language, but I think it's very deep that when it comes to social relations, you still default to simplistic ways of
Right.
like the relationship between twos, the relationship between the settler and the, I guess, the native. And I mean, I don't know, I don't even know what the but or in terms of the economic man, the rational economic man, and so on. And I feel like I'm also thinking about this because for a big part of earlier this year, we spent time on the question of logic and reason.
Yeah.
Because I think we were talking about it because logic in some ways is more of a, I don't know if this is entirely true, but I think we are talking about logic. When we talk about logic, it's more of a, it has in some ways been distorted by the peculiar way in which natural science advanced. Natural science did not advance without white supremacy. It had to. It only advanced with white supremacy, and therefore the logic of white supremacy is, it's part of it. And I think when we were talking about reason back, like when we were reading Kant and so on earlier this year, we were trying to work out, like basically the question of how human beings think, how we need to think today in terms of new, new kinds of new ideological relationships, not simply between individuals but between civilization, and how we understand our possibilities today. And I mean, I was bringing up the question of logic and reason because I think what we are trying to work out today, and from last week and so on, what you're saying is that I think we're trying to advance. We are trying to advance logic itself. We're trying to advance logic in a way that is not simply, it's not simply imprisoned by, by sort of the rational imagination that comes out of enlightenment, but how that is expanded. And I mean, I just wanted to say this because this is it's a deep question, that the distinction between investigation and the laws, because when as revolutionaries, we are trying to study society, we're also studying ourselves. And I think this is why you saying that we have, like distinguishing between methods of investigation, logic of investigation, means that we are trying to go outside of it and study ourselves. And maybe.
Yeah.
So she's not going to be very coherent. It's not going to be very coherent because I need to eat lunch and my brain doesn't operate without much food. But I just wanted to bring in, it seems like kind of going back a little bit to I think Jeremiah posed the question, like, okay, are we saying something different? Is class and race, like, are they operating the same
Equally
in U.S. society? And I just wanted to mention, like, I've been trying to work my way through Black Marxism by Frederick Robinson. Of course, he's like one of the sort of pivotal theorists of racial capitalism. So, you know, he seems like an important sort of thinker within this. But it seems like what we're trying to say is, well, so his whole formulation is racial capitalism, right? Racial is describing capitalism, racial capitalism, right? But I think what we're saying is that they're co-constitutive. Right?
Yes,
So
yes, that's it.
the racialization and capitalism co-constitutive. But I wanted to get maybe a little clarity on that because I think there was a little bit of contradiction between but so it feels like that's a core piece, right, of this logic that we're trying to work on. And then two just ideas that I have sort of branching off of that is it seems to me like y'all talk about this like initial conditions idea, which I hadn't thought of before. And it seems like a lot of the racial capitalism stuff, you know, a lot of the initial conditions of that is like slavery and like the founding of America. But of course, yeah, Reconstruction complicates that. So it seems like, yeah, this, like I'm pulling out of this discussion the idea of like Reconstruction being the initial conditions of our modern.
This is interesting. Yeah,
and not necessarily slavery, right? And then the other thing is this idea of whiteness, which like I'm very interested in. And I think this dialectic, right, of the Black worker ruling elite, I feel like there's an important thing that that's doing, that Du Bois is doing with saying that, you know, what am I trying to say? There's this thing in like, you know, woke culture, right, that is saying, you know, talking about people of color, black people being marginalized, right? But then of course there's also the talk of like, you know, white privilege and all of that stuff, right? White being you know, superior obviously to black. But I think, okay, so the reason why like so much of the origin of me getting into all this was I was listening to some interview and I think it was Robin D.G. Kelly. I think it was his interview, and he was talking about his book, and he was saying that Cedric Robinson loved to quote his friend, or his advisor or mentor or something. Cedric Robinson loved to quote his friend, Otis Madison, who said that let me quote it right. Otis Madison said that the purpose of racism is to control the behavior of white people, not black people. For black people, guns and tanks are sufficient. So that, just like that quote, is like is I carry it with me, you know, wherever I go, whatever space, whatever intellectual space I'm in. It's always captured me. And so I just wanted to bring that in as like as I think sort of a piece of evidence of what we're trying to theorize around this idea that the white worker consciousness is sort of just as important as black worker consciousness, right? Because it's the dialectic. That's all for now, I guess.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
I know we're all really hungry.
Yeah.
But it reminded, what you said reminded me of the black worker is marginalized, but and this is my formulation, the ideas are not marginal. And yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess because one of my other questions, which gets at the question that I raised earlier, was is like, because I know that there's a specific discipline even of like sociology, which I guess Contopoulos
Yep.
is part of. But I'd always seen, let's say, work like Black Reconstruction. It's like multi-methodological.
Yes.
He's doing a lot within it. So I've always understood Du Boisian social science at large as absorbing multiple sciences within it, if that makes sense. So it's like, I guess, well, this has been my question is, when we talk about Du Boisian sociology or Du Boisian social science, is that something distinct from, let's say, political economy, or does it subsume political economy? Does that make sense?
It makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the turn to political economy was before there was sociology.
Right.
And sociology comes after political economy and even after political theory, because they were trying to understand the constitution of society, of modern European societies.
Yeah.
But then sociology comes, and it's unrecognizable in the beginning as sociology, and then it develops, trying to be social Darwinism, an evolutionary theory of society, but it all fails. And so Du Bois takes the name and takes it up and produces what we have. But then Du Boisian sociology, outside of what sociologists can recognize in the Philadelphia Negro and perhaps the Atlanta University studies, but most of what Du Bois is doing is mainly systems analysis, and that is what Contopoulos is doing. This is an area of sociological theory. A lot of times people say if you do theory, you're not doing actual research. That's not true. Actual research needs theory in the same way that theory needs actual research. But this is an encyclopedia of theories of social structures with certain, as Emily is pointing out, with certain assumptions such as complexity, such as emergentism, such as hierarchy, such as logics or processes of structuration. So I think, once the language, we understand the language that he's using, which is not that difficult, what he is thinking about or presenting becomes more understandable. And just one quick thing. This area of sociological theorizing is richer than economic theorizing.
Well, because that's my question, which is, I guess this is just my reading of, let's say, Black Reconstruction.
Yes.
There are times where it's useful. Du Bois deploys, you could say, Marxism, or you could say he deploys certain logics of the class struggle, where it's relevant. But I guess I'm trying to understand this: is Du Boisian sociology a thing apart from political economy, or does it absorb? Does it absorb it?
I think,
and then make it useful where it is, but then
I think it's the way we read Du Bois, and I think for our purposes we are compelled to appropriate Du Bois, and to the appropriation to be honest to Du Bois has to take into account all of this that we've been talking about. I would say, but just a quick thing, I would say that what he does is to transcend political economy.
So I feel like the part of what I was thinking about is like this idea of the Black worker and the white worker. It's used, I think, more as a sociological category. And I think actually, the macro, meso, micro thing is really helpful because the Black worker and white worker, they're individuals who are Black workers and white workers. But then there's also the question of how is consciousness structured?
Yeah.
What institutions, what
Yeah.
jobs, what
Yeah.
culture
Yeah.
like exists for the
Yeah.
white worker and the Black worker? And then finally, this level of like them being co-structuring structures that actually like basically describe or are an essential dynamic of the entire society.
See, this is I would, that's the emergentist
Yes.
concept, the co-constituting
Yeah.
of a system. And that's, so the system emerges and is constantly emerging in the dynamical relationships between at least these fundamental foundations of the social system.
But I think merely describing or using the concept of a worker, I think doesn't mean that it's just a political economic analysis, like at all. And I think,
But I guess for me, it's the question of, I guess, going back to the initial conditions or the inception point for any social structure, any social like dynamic, but especially the triad that we're most interested in is like, this is an open question. I'm not really convinced either way, but like, because like, what is it that creates a working class in the first place? You know, and like, like
what contradiction, what tension?
Yeah, but like, what creates a working class, and then what creates, you know?
And is that a political,
Yes.
economic, a sociological, or historical question, or all of the above in different ways?
and I think that's why locating Reconstruction and the defeat of Reconstruction
Yes.
is really significant as a starting place to
As
then
an
actually
initial
explore,
condition,
to
as-
actually explore like how much of it is the birth of like modern capitalism,
Yes.
but also the color line,
Yes.
and like the striving of Black folk with the dictatorship of the Black proletariat, and then like why and
Yes.
how all of that was destroyed.
See, that this, I think we're getting at, and see, this is, I think, the weakness of Cedric Robinson. All of this discussion, he's assuming capitalism, we know it, and he goes through some, and then we add race onto it, so we get racial capitalism. It's just like settler colonialism.
It's just the complexion of capitalism.
Yeah, or you don't have to explain much because, oh, we all know it's a terrible thing because it's capitalist and racist, you know, or we know it's a terrible thing because it's settler and colonialism, you know. So it's more of an affectation than a cause and effect relationship, if you want to do that. So I think you know, this is what I'm agreeing with very much what you all are saying. You need a more complexified logic of investigation. And just don't throw out these things. And of course, you know, Cedric Robinson, when he talks about the Black radical tradition, Fanon, Du Bois, and CLRJ. Well, what about Du Bois? He says Black Reconstruction, but what about Black Reconstruction? So I think a fuller, you know, as you, but I agree with this thing. What, you know, we could say the initial condition is civilizational. Maybe, but certainly the initial condition of the social system that we're talking about is a defeat of Reconstruction. And then we can talk.
Yeah, because I guess like my part of like another way of phrasing also what Emily said, which is also a question I have, is like when we have this, sorry if this is getting a little pedantic, but like when we have this triad, at some point, do the three constituent parts, constituting parts of the triad, are they what is constituting each other? Or is it still like, let's say, like the color line and capitalism constituting, like...
You got to work it out.
I know.
See, that's that's how complicated, but it is a necessary complexification.
Yeah.
We have to work through this.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's also, I don't know if this is a point of your question, but the answers will also have to we'll always have to take into account what's
materially happening with human beings.
Yes.
Like the concrete of like how the human beings themselves and the structure, multiple layers of structures and their interactions are changing too.
Yes.
It's not going to just be worked out
Yeah.
from like logic collapsing on itself.
Wait, can I just add one quick thing? I think I've been struggling with this whole discussion is the relationship between consciousness and the structuring of society, because I think what you're bringing up is what I've been thinking about from the very beginning, even going back to Du Bois's criticism of sociology as a science or the way it's practiced itself, where he says that you always start from the bigger formations, where you should be starting with the individual human being as the agent that creates these biggers, or these bigger structures emerge from the interactions of individual human beings. And I think what I'm struggling with, and I'm sure we'll work it out as we work it out, but like, does the logic emerge with the individual, or does it become a logic of the group once the individual forms a group of some kind? Or does that make sense? Like, does the logic emerge in the individual consciousness of white people, of black people?
Are we talking about the logic of social structure?
Yeah, ultimately what becomes the structuring mechanisms of society itself? Does it emerge in the consciousness of individuals acting in a certain way, because in a certain historically constituted way, or however you want to say it? Or is it the groupings of individual? I don't even have words, but the connection between the consciousness. Because one thing I also thought about when you were talking about how it's important to investigate the logic of social structures, is one thing that came to my mind is, okay, this is the task for a scientist, right? This requires scientific investigation. But then you also see people who are not, who don't consider themselves as scientists, but like Kathy was saying, consider themselves to be revolutionaries who want to change society, also study these structures, even though they'd not call it studying of social structures. Where King has an analysis of the logics of American society, and so does Baldwin. But then they're not doing it for the scientific task of like providing language and theory to this, but to apply it to actually changing society and so on. So I think the connection between consciousness and the structuring of society is not super clear to me.
I just wanted to add one small thing, which is when this conversation was happening, I was reminded of Du Bois talking about the general strike.
Yes.
Because that is something that tells me about the consciousness of a people who have not yet been recognized as workers
And as a people.
But then you have evidence of a consciousness. When black people go on strike, that's a contradiction. That's something that had not ever happened before. And I think I'm trying to work out in my head how that is an exhibit or a proof of the consciousness of people who have not been yet given the category of a people, almost. And I was trying to think about this in terms of what we call the initial conditions.
Yeah.
And I'm not entirely certain that the initial conditions are civilization.
Interesting.
At this point, I'm not.
Well, just say they don't have to be.
Right.
Or they could. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you, man.
I'll tell you how I was thinking about it. Because when Bill was talking, I realized that I had one major assumption that I was making when this entire conversation was happening, which is that this is a uniquely American experience. The fact that the macro is being explained by the logic of trialectics is uniquely American. It's happening on this land, and it's not global. It can't be applied pretty much
Everywhere
just
to
anywhere,
everything.
to
Yes, I
everything.
agree.
And so when we're talking about America as a unique experiment in this in this logical process, I question, like, where does American civilization begin? And Does that have, because can the initial conditions be civilizational without the recognition of the fact that this trialectics was started at the difficult reconstruction? I don't think.
I think it's an open question whether it's.
I'm getting a headache. This is so
Well, yeah, I think it's a
You started.
You
started. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just how much is exclusive to the American system, and how much becomes part of the world system?
Yeah.
Because Du Bois ends the Black Worker chapter by saying this is the basic problem of the darker workers around the world, and one could argue that Du Bois is saying that almost like. Because he actually does draw a causal relationship between the defeat of Reconstruction and the consolidation of a stage of like a new stage of imperialism. Like later in the book, he makes that argument.
Yeah.
And so one could argue that the defeat of Reconstruction then triggers this broader global phenomenon, and like one could that's different from saying that within each individual society it is the same trialectic, but that on a world scale there is maybe something of a triad still that becomes
with
part
the
of
colonial world.
Yeah, the colonial world. There becomes something because of this originating moment in the defeat of Reconstruction, I think.
I know we have to go,
Yeah,
but I would just say one thing. I think, yeah, I would agree with you about the general and the particular, but I think in our case, given the paucity of social structure, social systemic analysis, that it's just like Prophet Cherry and then just getting out of reading the Old Testament. So I think it is, yeah, you see where I'm coming from. I don't know. I think that's a problem with Marxist dialectics, is that they wanted to universalize it.
Yeah.
And I think it is best sometimes to be a bit more modest in the approach. But I see where, and I think this is the thing with Cedric Robinson or with Gerald Horne. You get this category of settler colonialism, and then there's no more to discuss. Or you get the category racial capital, there's no more to discuss. But here, like Emily points out, the emergentist qualities of social structure. And but that's all I would say.
Okay. I can read comments and then we can end. Todd said, "This lecture is nailing it, Doc." And then our sound was not working at the very beginning and people were really disappointed. They're like, "We hope you're taking good notes."
We should publish today's remarks.
Okay. Then let's see. I know. I'm gonna read Jahan's. Give me a second.
Someone said tell him about Noam, Doc.
Yeah.
Someone said tell him about Noam Chomsky.
Yeah,
Doc.
people were like,
Yeah, we
yes,
have a
the
lot of
sly
names.
fox is way worse than the mean wolf.
Oh,
then,
that's
And Spark said Noam Chomsky. And then
He said Noam Chomsky.
And then
Noam
Alice Talker said, "I felt it also. For me, Noam always had a cloud around him." And then Magna said, "Deep how Chomsky was so comfortable and complimentary with Epstein, but not with Martin Luther King's speeches." And then Jahan said, "Chomsky had dinner with the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak at Epstein's house and defended it as a lively evening."
lively.
BK said, "Lucid and informative analysis."
Oh, BK.
And then Alice Talker said, "God only knows how many more expresses these sly foxes were on." Someone said, Breaking Ground Media says 100 emoji, Dr. Montero. And Dr. King was never concerned with loving the perversely rich. Breaking Ground Media says, absolutely, race does have material consequences in the US empire. And then Jahan said, I feel the Epstein scandal is shaking the foundations of the white supremacist social system. Has anything in history shaken the foundations of the white masses' faith in white leadership and their state like this? This has great consequences for the social structures of white people and US society as a whole. Perhaps the exhaustion of MAGA indicates the exhaustion of their parentheses white logics of politics and social change. Yeah, and then David Ball says, if there's no connection with each other through empathy, then there can be no revolutionary process. Yeah, that's all the comments.
Really quickly, I feel like we've been announcing this event for a while, but it's finally upon us. Yes, it is. It's going to be this Tuesday, November 25th at 4:30 that our Lucian Blackwood Reading Group puts on its production. Darkwater, Narratives Within the Veil, featuring many people actually around this table here reading selections from Darkwater, but also, it says interpretive comments and also, what it really means. As Jeremiah was saying, the revolutionary mutual, the human discovery of knowledge, but also picking up on that revolutionary knowledge left to us by Du Bois for new time and for making sense of this very complex crisis and the need for actually this work to be done in a way that very few other conditions actually allow in this time of so much crisis to actually carry forward. And yeah, we just want to lift up what this group has meant over the past year. And, a lot of the things that I feel like we're discussing here, it could feel like I do feel that we've actually been drawing upon some of those conversations, like, the work and wealth example, chapter in Darkwater before this question of like logic and also the American revolutionary process for today. So we're really excited and I can't imagine a better way to cap off the last year of reading together at the Lucian Blackwood Library with human beings and with people searching for knowledge.
Yeah, there will be some original poetry from John. Not to put you on the spot. And then there will be some music brought to you by Serafina and Shimbarko at the very end. And we know that the time is not always ideal for people who have work, but we are going to be starting at 4:30 sharp. So people can also come whenever they become free. But
yeah, doors open at 4.
Doors open at 4.
Feel free to come early.
Meaning the library will be open.
Setting up. There's so much to get through and share with everybody that we just have to begin on time.
Yeah.
Alright, bye.
Should we announce if we're doing free school next Saturday?
We're doing free school next Saturday, yes.
Oh, okay. See
Aren't
you
we?
guys next.
Shouldn't we?
Yeah, we should.
I don't see why not.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We'll do it on Christmas if we have to.
Okay, see you guys next Saturday.
Okay, happy Thanksgiving, everybody who we won't see before.
Be quick with packing up.